Chapter 453. It was like the sound of a heavenly drum. A muffled sound spread out from the thunderclouds above. Then the desert suddenly shook. Countless grains of sand flew up from the ground and danced uneasily. In the unbearable heat, the stars and moonlight were quickly covered by the thunderclouds. Terrifying bolts of lightning continued to emerge from the slowly descending endless black clouds. When the first drop of cold rain-soaked in radioactive dust fell from the sky, Huaisher finally heard a high-pitched sound that seemed to tear the whole world apart. The wind started to blow. At first, it was a slow and huge push like sticky glue. But then, with the crazy increase in wind speed, the city debris floating in the sky in front of Huaisher shook crazily like a wind chime. The rusty steel rubbed against each other, sparks burst, and a sharp hiss was heard in the dull noise of the building collapsing. Under the shroud of the wind, the entire ruins seemed to have been thrown into a washing machine in an instant, twitching crazily. Countless gravel burst out from it, fell from the sky, and landed on the dancing yellow sand. It hit the place where Huaisher just stood. At this moment, Huaisher finally reacted when the crow screamed. He picked up the bag without hesitation and ran. Like a headless fly, with his back facing the whistling wind, he used all his strength. Ignoring the accumulated fatigue after a night of trekking, he turned into a phantom and jumped between the yellow sand. A gale swept out from behind him, bringing with it a suffocating wind pressure, almost lifting Huaisher into the air. Then, a bright light flashed in the dark sky. Huaisher's scalp suddenly went numb. There was a shrill lightning falling from the sky, striking the sand dune next to Huaisher. In the spreading electrostatic field, countless charred gravel and viscous liquid silicide splashed around. Then, he involuntarily rose into the air. This was because a large rock that came out of nowhere had brushed past his back. It was like a cannonball. The big rock instantly tore the backpack, then smashed the gas stove. Then, it crushed the shrunken tent and miscellaneous items into pieces. After turning the backpack into a wreckage, it roared away. He only wanted half of Huaisher's life. In midair, Huaisher's vision went black, and he spat out blood madly. His entire body fell to the ground like a rag doll. He didn't even have time to catch his breath before he got up and ran forward. Fortunately, he had stuffed all the important things in his saddlebag and did not take them out. Otherwise, he would definitely be dead this time. While he was running for his life, the Geiger counter began to emit a sharp warning beep. Endless rain fell from the dark clouds that covered the entire sky, instantly covering everything in sight. The heavy rain carried radiation as it swirled wildly in the storm. From time to time, it would be torn apart and pierced by huge rocks flying from afar. The thick water vapor almost suffocated Huaisher. What was even more frightening was that he found that the desert under his feet was quickly becoming muddy and difficult to traverse. He couldn't walk any further. Bolts of lightning quickly struck down from the clouds, like blades falling from the sky, tearing everything apart with irresistible force, and briefly illuminating the world that was about to be drowned. It also illuminated the end of the desert, the row of the mighty flood that swept over like a black wall. Heaven and earth roared. It's over. Huaisher's face was pale. This time, he was afraid that he was going to die. Backpack, your saddlebag. The crow came out from his collar and shouted, "Why don't you use your equipment, you idiot?" Huaisher was stunned for a moment, and then he was ecstatic. He looked down at the saddlebag at his waist. The survival backpack of a wise man. Didn't he still have a crucial opportunity that he hadn't used yet? He didn't quickly grab this straw in a hurry. Instead, he forced himself to calm down and began to think. What did he need the most right now? It definitely wasn't an umbrella. It was something that could quickly take him away from here, something that could speed up his escape and prevent him from being swept away by the flood. The moment he figured out the situation, Huaisher reached into the inner pocket of the saddlebag and grabbed a handle. "It's you, Pikachu." The next moment, as he pulled out his hand, an item that had been compressed in a slender pocket was pulled out from the saddlebag. It looked like a small backpack, but in addition to a few fixed straps, there were also 2 handles connected by ropes. He didn't understand, but there was no time for him to hesitate. He felt the earth tremble violently. The muddy desert under his feet had already begun to tremble. The mighty flood in the distance was tyrannical and was about to swallow everything. Using his fastest speed, he hung the new backpack on his body and fastened all the safety ropes. Then, he pulled the two handles with all his might. There was a soft bang. With the explosion of the gunpowder in the compressed backpack, the heavy item that had been compressed in the backpack instantly ejected and wildly expanded in the strong wind. In the blink of an eye, it quickly rose above Huaishi's head. The huge umbrella was filled with the strong wind and quickly rose into the sky. Like pulling a radish, it pulled Huaishi up from the ground and rushed into the sky involuntarily. By the time Huaishi reacted, he was already hundreds of meters above the ground. The black clouds that were as thick as iron were right above his head. It was almost within reach. Huaishi subconsciously held his breath and felt the trees of lightning wildly strike the ground from his side. Then, in the storm, the roaring roar spread. The flood from the distance was mighty and surging, completely submerging the place where he had been. The tsunami-like flood carried incredible power, easily crushing the ruins of the city below into powder, engulfing the abnormal area and spreading mightily. Above the surging turbid current, Huaishi, who was in the storm, was completely out of breath. At the last moment, what pulled him up into the sky was the emergency life-saving equipment taken out of the saddlebag, a paraglider. Now, with the sweeping of the strong wind, he felt that he had become a drifting leaf in the wind, rolling helplessly and awkwardly. Under the washing of the heavy rain, he kept falling and was lifted up by the storm. The heavy thunder sounded one after another in his ears. He clumsily pulled the two handles and controlled the direction of the paraglider so that he would not be hit by the thunder or be smashed in a meat paste by some damn thing falling from the sky. Under the reflection of the mirror of nothingness, everything was vivid in his eyes. All the signs of danger were clearly marked, allowing him to easily avoid them. It didn't take long for him to master the skill of operating a paraglider. He just had to pay attention to avoiding the thunder. The storm would push him into the sky, avoiding the surging torrents and crises on the ground. After the fear and lingering fear gradually subsided, it was replaced by the novelty of flying. Even if he felt that he was just gliding at the moment, he still couldn't help but be intoxicated in it. He felt the turbulent storm lifting him up and floating between the thunderclouds and the swamp country under his feet. Every time he felt the sign of being covered by static electricity in the clouds, or the warning of the premonition of death, he immediately rubbed out an iron bar and threw it with all his strength to shift the target of the thunder strike away from himself. He even had the time to overlook the terrible scene brought about by this natural disaster from the sky. The whole world was engulfed in endless torrential rain and flood. The radiation from the Bay Area reverberated between this barren world. It was as if everything had been thrown into a small box and was being shaken with all its might. Heaven and earth were spinning and trembling, venting the violent anger accumulated over a long period of time. Huaishi was like a little insect that could fly. She trembled as she hid between heaven and earth to avoid becoming the target of this tyrannical venting. But then, before he had time to exhale a breath, he saw the despairing scene in the distance. That was the place where countless storms went. In the narrow gap between the torrent and the black clouds, a thick, giant pillar slowly rose from the torrent of the earth. Then the black clouds twisted, formed a vortex, and slowly pressed down. In the end, the two formed a huge tornado that swallowed everything under the attraction of the wind tunnel, radiating blazing lightning in all directions. The majestic and dignified figure descended between the heavens and the earth, pulling everything into its stomach and bringing complete destruction to everything. Damn it, why? Huaishi couldn't resist the urge to cry and screamed under the paraglider. He struggled to pull the paraglider, trying to change direction, but it was too late. He had been captured by the power of the tornado and was involuntarily beginning to move in the direction of the storm. He rotated around the huge grayish-black tornado. He was so fast and impatient to throw himself into the vortex of death. In the fierce wind, Huaishur was pulled by the paraglider and began to spin wildly in the air. He began to roll involuntarily. The world was spinning. He struggled hard, but it was no use. The huge tornado was getting closer and closer, more and more ferocious. Through countless sand and water vapor, Huaishur could even see the terrifying lightning contained in it. His vision suddenly turned black. A small stone smashed into his gas mask, instantly shattering the tough outer shell. The huge kinetic energy was like a sniper rifle bullet, whistling past Huaishur's forehead. If he hadn't subconsciously twisted his head under the premonition of death, he was afraid that he would have been hit in the head by the stone. But this was only delaying the time of his death, because the tornado was already close at hand. An endless premonition of death rose from his body. It was as if every inch of air in this world could not wait to kill him, to crush him into meat paste, and to leave him with no bones left. With the wail of the broken paraglider, Huaishur was thrown out. He finally fell from the sky, smashing into the crazily surging torrent under the tornado. In the suffocation of lack of oxygen and intense dizziness, Huaishur subconsciously twisted his body. He prayed that he could swim in the wind like a fish. But it was too late. He had already been dried and turned into a salted fish. Now it was time to cook. He couldn't escape. Just like a meteorite falling from the sky, in the roar of the wind, Huaishur broke through the outer layer of the tornado and fell into the vacuum of death brewing with countless lightning and destruction. For a moment, he felt that he was hallucinating. Incredible. The world seemed to be suddenly silent for a moment. When he raised his head in the violent whirl and looked down, the chaotic scene was illuminated by the fleeting lightning. But in the countless whirlpools formed by the violent turbulence, there was a part of the sea that maintained a deathly stillness. It seemed to be frozen. Under the trampling of a pair of leather boots, countless surging forces were easily leveled. Stress, tension, gravity, and even vacuum, everything that didn't matter fell into a bottleneck. There was a slender figure walking on the frozen water, as if walking in the back garden of her home. The surging storm couldn't swallow her, because she was like a phantom walking in the fleeting gap between the storm, calmly walking forward. Sensing Huaishur falling from the sky, the face wearing the gas mask tilted its head in confusion, as if wondering where the hell such a thing came from. Then it stretched out its hand. Huaishur felt an invisible finger tugging at her ankle. Following the tug of the figure, she was abruptly pulled in that direction. Then it easily reached out and grabbed the back of his collar. It almost inconceivably dissolved the huge kinetic energy. He fell from the sky. Only the calm water under his feet trembled for a moment, and there was a muffled sound like boiling. Huaishur's vision went black. He couldn't stand the huge recoil after layers of offset and such a violent change, and fell into a coma. Before he fainted, he only heard a familiar voice in the storm. It was like an illusion. The voice laughed softly, so happily. "You really came, Huaishur? The last 3 days at the end of the month are said to be double. Remember to leave the monthly tickets for me." Chapter 454. In the low echo like the tide, mixed with the crackling sound of burning firewood, Huaishur woke up from a long nightmare, opened his eyes, and saw the edge of the cliff close at hand and the turbid torrent under the edge. The rain had stopped, but he couldn't see the starry sky. He was lying on a rock protruding from the flood, pillowing his saddlebag next to a burning fire. He tried to move his hands and feet, but he felt the pain all over his body, and he could barely move. Hearing his groan, the thin figure in front of the fire turned around, reached out, and took off the gas mask on his face, revealing a head of mottled hair and an old and unfamiliar face. "You're awake?" He grinned, revealing a strange and gloomy smile, and happily lowered his head and patted the operation box next to him. The sex change operation was very successful. Kuh from now on, you're a beautiful little girl. Huaishur couldn't help but roll his eyes and sigh softly. "Don't scare me, senior sister." The hoarse and low voice paused slightly, and then changed subtly, becoming gentle and pleasant. Have you guessed it? With that, the old man raised his hand and peeled off a thin layer of mask from his face, revealing the familiar face hidden underneath, and his long hair slid down his shoulders like water. Luo Xian smiled happily, and her eyes narrowed slightly, like a pair of crescent moons. How did you find out? Didn't you already say hello before? Huaisher struggled to prop himself up and shook his head. At that time, I was still awake. No wonder you slept so soundly, and you didn't wake up. Luo Xian held her chin and looked at him, full of interest. I waited for so long, and I've been thinking. If he still doesn't open his eyes, it's better to quietly break his neck. I really hesitated for a long time. Huaisher smiled helplessly. Should I thank you for not killing me? You're welcome. Luo Xian shook her head. Because I couldn't help it, I crushed all your toes. Huaisher was so scared that he almost jumped up from the ground. Immediately, he saw Luo Xian's mischievous smile. Just kidding. Am I some kind of monster in your heart? No, it's just... Huaisher thought for a long time and scratched his head. It's just that I didn't expect to meet you so soon. This is a chance encounter, isn't it? Luo Xian reached out and helped Huaisher up from the ground. Then, she stuffed a plastic bowl into his hand. The steaming hot curry rice was exuding a charming aroma. Come, it's just right. Eat it. Thanks. Huaisher subconsciously picked up the spoon. Halfway through his thanks, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. When he came to his senses, he looked at the curry in the bowl, and his face turned as green as the curry. This meal smelled really good, but when it was eaten, would it be fatal? Luo Xian tilted her head and looked at him. She scooped a spoonful from his bowl and stuffed it directly into his mouth. It's frozen food. I just heated it up. It won't hurt you, right? Huaisher chewed for a while and found that he was still alive and tasted okay. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But for some reason, he felt that there was something wrong with the taste. Especially as he chewed, the curry in his mouth became more and more sour. It was too sour. Why was it so sour? His expression twitched. Ah, so sour. Luo Xian finally reacted after taking a bite. She shook her head regretfully. Probably it's expired? Huaisher looked at the spoon in her hand. He wanted to say something, but stopped. That spoon was the same one that was stuffed into his mouth just now. Luo Xian looked at him in confusion. Are you not used to it? No, I'm used to it. Huaisher shook his head like a rattle drum. He lowered his head and took a bite. Then he frowned. This time it was bitter. So bitter, so bitter. Eating it made one's heart feel sour and bitter. But after 2 more bites, the bitterness quickly disappeared. There was only the taste of curry left. It was the kind of taste that didn't have any special taste. After eating, Luo Xian took out a pack of wet wipes from her pocket and came over to wipe the leftover soup from the corners of his mouth. Her slender, cold fingers pressed on his face. He couldn't help but blink his eyes. Don't be embarrassed. You just severely strained your muscles. Just treat yourself as a patient. Luo Xian threw the wet wipes into the fire and said with a smile, have a good sleep. You'll be fine tomorrow. Huaisher moved his fingers with difficulty and felt a burst of soreness. With his deliberate adjustment, the biosphere in his body changed again. The healthy mountain ghost sacred mark quickly spread all over his body and began to develop toward regeneration. A few bones were cracked, some internal organs were slightly ruptured, a brain concussion and lightning burns. But they were not serious injuries. He would be fine after a little rest. But he had to drink more water. Then a huge water tank was placed in front of him. Please, Your Excellency Judge. Luo Xian smiled. I specially prepared it for you. It was so well prepared. Why is there so much water? Huaisher couldn't believe it. He could feel that there was no radiation in the water. It was a pure natural source of clean water. Luo Xian pointed to the shovel next to her backpack. Find the right place and dig down. The underground water in this place is quite rich. As long as you find the right place and punch down a few times, the water will spray out by itself. Huaisher's face twitched. He couldn't understand Luo Xian's method of finding water. But when he recalled the scene of her walking freely in the storm and torrent, he felt more and more incredulous. How? How did you do it? Luo Xian was puzzled. She tilted her head and looked at him. It's just a storm. You can avoid it when it's not paying attention, right? I see. I understand. Huaisher suddenly understood. So it's taking advantage of the wind when it's not paying attention. So the trick of walking on water is to take advantage of the water when it's not paying attention? What nonsense are you talking about, Huaisher? Luo Xian said seriously. In that case, won't you fall? If there is no resistance, it will be very painful. I don't think the two of us are on the same channel from the beginning, sister. Do we really come from the same training class? Why are you so much better than me? Then why? Huaisher's face twitched. Chakra, are you talking about the Indian chakra method? Ah, if you say so, you can do it with a little effort, but isn't it too laborious? Luo Xian shook her head. In fact, it's just the application method of U-step that I figured out myself. If you learn how to sync, you can easily master it. I'll teach you later. Forget it. Huaisher couldn't help but cough. He felt the gap between their talents. Not to mention syncing, he was still stuck at Skybreaker. He could only use it as an inferior ancient mecha martial art. If he really practiced it with his physical body, he was afraid that he would explode on the spot. After graduating from the Orchard Gym for so long, he was still at the most basic stage of a drummer. Even if he deliberately stored up his chord skills, he could only guarantee the success rate of major 3 chords. When he could use Thunderbolt, well, he would be happy. How could he dare to bite off more than he could chew? He slumped on the ground again, sucking on the water tank with an iron straw in his mouth. Suddenly, he remembered what Luo Xian called him and felt that it was not right. Wait a minute. What's the matter with the judge? You still don't know? Luo Xian looked at him blankly. Seeing Huaisher's confused look, she couldn't help but shake her head. She took out a card from her wallet with an unopened plastic seal. You've released a new card. What's this? Huaisher was stunned. He straightened his neck and leaned closer. His expression suddenly twitched. That was a brand new everything card? Memorabilia Series Clash of the Stars limited edition card pack. Judge, Huaisher, serial number 6 among the 16 character cards. The back of the bronze card had a silver border that represented outstanding contributions. On the card surface was a figure captured from the surveillance footage of the Stellaris. The military officer of the Astronomy Society stood in front of the guillotine. His face was shrouded in darkness where the fire could not illuminate, but his eyes seemed to be burning. He opened his arms and bowed his head, announcing the arrival of judgment to one of the main culprits of the incident. Effect A Executioner. When this card appears, all cards marked with the Astronomy Society's black letter will lose 1 HP and be given a temporary weakened state of defense. At the bottom, there was a short introduction written in bold. Judgment, your judgment has come. Your judgment is standing in front of you. Now, your judge is looking at you. Huaisher was stunned for a long time after reading it. Unbelievable. Did I get into the card pool again? Yes, because it's not the protagonist. Only 4,000 cards were sold, and it sold like crazy. Luo Xian stuffed the card into her wallet. It wasn't easy for me to get this. What do you think? Big sister supports you so much. Are you touched? Huaisher did not know if he was touched or not. He only knew that he did not dare to move in front of Luo Xian. He was like a silly deer in front of a lion or a tiger. Especially when the fire illuminated her moist lips, it always made him feel as if she was not full and was hungry. The premonition of death rose faintly and quickly dissipated. This repeated cycle made him feel cold at the back of his head. Huaisher subconsciously glanced at the saddlebag behind him. The sword of virtue was still in there. Should he give her another shot to cure her? As if she knew what Huaisher was thinking, Luo Xian chuckled softly. The same trick is useless in front of me. Where did this holy warrior come from? Anyway, he couldn't beat her and couldn't escape. Not to mention that Luo Xian saved him. If she wanted to kill him, he would have been dead already. Huaisher just didn't know what kind of state Luo Xian was in now. Was she as calm, as Elder Luo said? Was she still entangled and troubled by the love of the abyss and unable to live normally? Luo Xian seemed to be normal. Her behavior was normal. Maybe he just had a guilty conscience. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. He wondered if he was feeding his senior sister with the heart of a villain. Luo Xian skillfully cleaned up the tableware, almost extravagantly washed it with clean water and put it away. Huaishir could see that she seemed to have only brought these things in her backpack. Other than that, she really didn't bring anything. A fake martial arts master, a real martial arts master. JPG once again, feeling the familiar sense of frustration. Huaishir couldn't help but feel more and more helpless. Comparing with others, one would die. Comparing with goods, one would throw them away. Why did he take things so hard and compare his ability with a real genius when he had nothing better to do? During the long night, the two of them talked about their lives over the past few days, and Huaishir also told her about his deeds of courting death along the way. The king of the Outer Dao? When Luoxian heard about the war on the Stellaris, she showed a look of realization. No wonder I saw him in Southeast Asia a few days ago. So that's why? Huaishir widened his eyes. You saw him? Yes. Luoxian nodded and said with emotion, he's a very kind old grandpa. He's completely different from what father said. He even lent me a lot of money. Huaishir suddenly couldn't hold it in anymore. Why was there such a big difference between people? When he met him, he would punch him hard, but when he met a beautiful girl, he would borrow money. Wasn't this difference in treatment a little too much? But he seems to be using a drummer too? Huaishir asked for confirmation. What does it have to do with Teacher Luo? If you want to talk about it, he's more like a grandmaster, right? Luoxian thought for a moment and nodded. But 14 years ago, he was punched into the abyss by father. If it weren't for that, father would have been a level 5 by now. Amazing, what the F***CK grandmaster. He didn't expect Teacher Luo to be such a filial son. She directly punched her own teacher until he froze. In short, if you meet him in the future, run as far away as possible. Luoxian reminded him. Although the heretic monarch wouldn't go as far as to vent his anger on a child, he has very strict requirements. If you don't meet his requirements, he might just get rid of you in passing. When she said this, she lowered her head and looked at the faint scar on the back of her hand. She recalled the hardy battle a few days ago, and her expression became cheerful. Okay, the two of you seem to be getting along quite well. Huaishir's eyes twitched. He decided not to get involved in this mess. Anyway, the one who fought with the king of the Outer Dao was Osiris. What did it have to do with little page of Huaihai? After Huaishir finished talking about his journey of courting death, the conversation between the two fell into silence. In the silence, Huaishir lay on the ground and tossed and turned. In the end, he couldn't help but look back at Luoxian, who had laid down a sleeping bag next to the fire. These days, he hesitated for a moment and finally asked, These days, have you been traveling all the time? Yes. Luoxian reached out and picked up her backpack. She showed him the strange souvenirs hanging on it. Look, Dongxia, the Russian Federation, and Southeast Asia. Then from here, I went to America. After that, I went to Rome, and finally to Egypt. Like a child showing off her treasures, she smiled proudly. Amazing, right? Huaishir was silent for a moment and asked softly, Have you been alone all this time? Yes. Luoxian nodded calmly. Isn't this how traveling is? Traveling alone, I could go anywhere I want. It's the first time I've been so far away from home. Everything is new, but I always feel like a country bumpkin. You won't laugh at me, right? No. Huaishir quickly shook his head. Looking at her happily holding up the map and the route, he hesitated for a moment and asked softly, Sister Xian, aren't you lonely? Traveling was a lonely thing. Even with Crow and Beelzebub accompanying him, Huaishir still felt lonely from time to time. When he looked up, he saw the eternal starry sky, the boundless barren land, the endless journey, and a world that was so quiet that he could only hear his own breathing. It was as if he had been abandoned by the whole world, moving forward alone. But it had only been a few days, and Luoxian had traveled so far and so long. She walked alone on the road. Would she feel pain and sadness? Huaishir didn't know. Luoxian seemed to be stumped by the question. Putting down the map, she turned around and looked at Huaishir in confusion. After a long time, she suddenly laughed. Of course, Huaishir, she said. She said, Of course I feel lonely, but isn't everyone lonely in this world? Even now, when we're so close to each other, will you know what I'm thinking? Huaishir was stunned. Luo Xian lowered her head and looked at the young man's face. Her eyes were like mirrors, reflecting his face. So, will you be afraid? Why sure? Huaishur subconsciously avoided her gaze, but soon after, she heard the sound of something breaking. She was moving her knees forward. Then she reached out and pulled him up from the ground. She held his face and forced him to look at her, into her eyes, until he couldn't avoid it. Then she revealed an almost doting smile. She hugged him just like how he hugged her in the past. Don't be afraid, Huaishur. She whispered, don't be afraid. The only thing I can be sure of is that you're definitely not alone. Luo Xian whispered softly. I believe that no matter where you go, those hopes placed on you will accompany you, and among them will definitely include my share. Huaishur froze on the spot. He only felt the warmth of her close proximity and her breath. Until she let go of his arm, he still didn't react. He stared at her blankly. He couldn't help blushing. Well, ahem. He couldn't help but look away. It sounds like a confession. Luo Xian tilted her head and looked at him, still smiling. Your words also sound like a tactful rejection. Huaishur's mind was blank. He didn't even know how to answer. It's okay. Luo Xian gently fiddled with his hair and told him, just like you didn't give up on me before, I will never give up on you. She told the young man in front of her seriously, if I really have a little bit of something that can be called love, then I will definitely keep it by your side. Huaishur froze on the spot, but she smiled and finally pinched his face gently. She turned around and went back to her sleeping bag. Have a good rest, Huaishur. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow you will go on a trip again. I believe that even if you are alone, you will never travel alone. Okay. Huaishur lay on the blanket that Luo Xian made for him, but he didn't feel sleepy at all. After a long time, he carefully raised his eyes and looked up. Luo Xian closed her eyes and lay quietly in the sleeping bag. Her breathing was even as if she was sleeping. Well, Sister Xian, yes. Thank you. You're welcome. She turned sideways and opened one eye to look at him. Isn't this what a big sister should do? Go to sleep. Good night. Okay, good night. Huaishur closed his eyes. This time, he fell into a deep sleep. When he opened his eyes again, it was already dusk of the second day. The firewood had been extinguished, and Luo Xian had disappeared like a dream. Only the blanket under his body seemed to still have the residual warmth of the dream. Huaishur slowly got up and looked around blankly. He saw the dark clouds gradually dissipating under the setting sun, and the empty starry sky that was revealed again. The billowing turbid flow had disappeared without trace. Instead, it was still dry yellow sand and endless desert. His journey was not over yet. There was still a long, hard journey ahead for him. But this time, unexpectedly, his heart didn't waver at all. Instead, it became full and peaceful. He rolled up the blanket and put it away. Once again, he picked up the saddlebag, but a small pendant fell from the blanket. It seemed to be a souvenir from somewhere. It was outlined with an iron plate that looked like a traveler holding a hiking stick. It felt like he was ready to set off at any time. Huaishur looked at the pendant in his hand and couldn't help but smile. He hung it on the saddlebag. Then, let's go. He whispered goodbye to his departing companion, turned around, and walked forward. Chapter 455. A week later, Huaishur finally left the core of the desert. After experiencing radiation dust, quicksand, and a desert that was completely cut off from all water and plant supplies, he arrived at the southern edge of the desert. In addition to the increasing number of abandoned houses and mines along the way, what proved that he was about to return to the civilized world was the sound of engines outside the temporary tent at noon. It was so loud and familiar. Ling Huaishur opened her eyes from her sleep. Sleepily, she climbed out of bed and lifted the curtain that she had made with tinfoil. In fact, other than the stall under her body, the entire temporary tent's frame was made by Huaishur using the metal reserves in her saddlebag and her imprisoning hands. In addition to the canvas on the surface of the tent, Huaishur also plated a layer of tin to block the wind. Under the sun, it looked strange and conspicuous. It was like a drop of mercury rolling on sand. The silver light was shining. After Huaishur rubbed his eyes and saw clearly, he saw several large off-road vehicles coming from the distant end, and a fleet of ships behind them. Yes, a fleet. Huaishir took out the binoculars from the bag and focused on it. He saw the ships sailing quickly on the sand with the help of the wind. Each of them was about the size of a bus. Black sails were hanging from them, and there seemed to be an air mattress-like device under the hull. There were also machine guns and other weapons on the bow of the ship. There were about 4 or 5 people on each ship, and they all looked tattered. They didn't look like good people. Now, 16 black sails were chasing the 3 off-road vehicles fleeing into the desert. The 2 sides were constantly exchanging fire, and the familiar explosion sounded one after another. There was no doubt that the 2 sides were fighting and killing. But Huaishir didn't want to get involved at all. This place was about 800 kilometers away from Canberra. It could be said that it was already quite close to Huaishir's destination. He was too lazy to complicate things. Even when he felt fear and killing intent from the off-road vehicles, Huaishir didn't make any counterattack. He just quietly stared at the ascender in the car through the binoculars. In a short moment, the 2 sides' eyes met. They looked at each other across the sea of sand. Immediately after, the skinny old man's eyes twitched, and he retracted his gaze. The off-road vehicle sped up and sped away, quickly disappearing into the sea of sand. The black sail fleet pursued relentlessly, but at the very back of the fleet, one of the small boats suddenly changed direction. Relying on the wind, it quickly sped in Huaishir's direction. I feel like something bad is going to happen. The crow on his shoulder clicked his tongue and sighed. You seem to be the kind of unlucky person who gets dragged into any trouble. Who's the one who did this? Huaishir couldn't help but roll his eyes. He raised his eyes to look at the black sail iron ship that was rapidly approaching. I don't know if it should be called a hovercraft or a sailboat, but the most conspicuous thing about it should be the black sails hanging from it. On the huge sail, there was a strange symbol drawn with white paint. It seemed to be a portrait. If you looked closely, you could see that it was the face of a middle-aged man with messy hair and a crown of thorns. The painter was obviously quite skilled. He only used simple black and white colors and a few strokes to draw out the essence of the face. Looking at that face, he felt like he was facing an endless sea of sand. It made him feel small and powerless. Just by relying on his own portrait, he exerted a pressure on the soul of the viewer. If it was a normal person, they would be frightened and unable to move. Do you know where they came from? Huaishir asked. Australia's largest ascender organization, the armed organization Sons of Desolation, established by Australia's crowned Sand King. The Crow gave a simple introduction. Australia's largest warlord, the actual ruler of 6 cities and 17 large settlements. All of Australia's ascenders are proud to be able to serve him. In short, if they want to mess with you, you will be in a lot of trouble. While the Crow was introducing, the black sail had already arrived. With a beautiful drift, it stopped in front of Huaishir. Dust rose like waves and scattered on Huaishir's body like rain. A cigarette, but was thrown down from above. At the bow of the ship, the young man with sunglasses stepped on the edge of the ship and looked down. He was bare-chested and was not afraid of the scorching sun. He only wore a rapid reaction vest with a magazine on his upper body. The dense tattoos on his chest and neck could be seen. He was an ascender. Behind him, there were a few fierce-looking men with weapons in their hands. They followed him and looked at Huaishir below the boat, their gazes unyielding. Huaishir also looked up at them and maintained a calm smile. Even against the glaring sun, he did not blink at all. Your car is really good. He nodded in appreciation. He did not see the expected cowardice. The man wearing sunglasses raised his eyebrows in surprise. He raised his hand and took off the sunglasses on his face. Then, he spoke as though he was interrogating Chun Xiaolian. Where did you come from? Dong Xia. Huaishir replied in Latin. I am not your enemy. I will not hinder your actions in the slightest. I hope you will not be too nervous. Nervous? The people on the ship looked at each other. It was as though they had heard a ridiculous joke. Then, they suddenly laughed out in ridicule. At this time, should they be nervous or should they be nervous about this unknown person before them? The tattooed ascender who was originally wearing sunglasses opened his mouth and spat the chewing gum at Huaishi's feet. His smile gradually turned cold. Be honest. I am asking you. Where did you come from? Why are you here? What is your purpose? I think I understand. Huaishi thought for a moment before replying. I set out from Darwin. I plan to go to Canberra. As for my purpose, does traveling count? The ascender who was wearing sunglasses was stunned for a moment. Then, his expression turned even colder. Are you kidding me, kid? You want to tell me that you came here through the desert alone? Isn't traveling like this? Huaishi shrugged. It's a bit tough, but there's a sense of accomplishment. Gotcha. The sound of a gun being loaded rang out. On the ship, several people had raised their weapons and aimed at the young man before them. Next time you lie, you better choose a good excuse, kid, the ascender said indifferently. A week ago, the radiation storm had just washed through the entire inner desert of Australia. Aside from Class 5 ascenders, no one could make it out alive. Actually, there's no need for such a high level. Huaishi shook his head and sighed. Besides, from what I know, there is more than one person who could make it out alive. I say, can you guys put down your guns first? I am quite nervous about this conversation. Calm down first. I want to take something out of my pocket. Don't shoot, okay? After saying that, he slowly raised his hand and put it into his saddlebag. However, the tattooed ascender instantly pulled out his pistol and pointed it at Huaishi's head. Don't move. Fine, Huaishi sighed. I won't move. You guys can help me take it. Okay? My ID is in my bag. You have to give me a chance to prove my innocence, right? Believe me, I don't want to cause trouble. I think you guys don't want to either. The ascender was silent for a moment. Then, he took a step back and put away his gun. Then, he waved his hand behind him. Soon, someone jumped down from the ship and searched Huaishi from head to toe. After finding no weapons, he reached out and touched Huaishi's bag. Soon, he pulled out a broken and heavy long sword. As if he had been stung by a scorpion, the person who was searching him screamed and let go of his hand. The long sword fell to the ground, and a burn mark appeared on his palm. In an instant, all kinds of guns and cannons were aimed at Huaishi's face. They were filled with killing intent. You took the wrong one. Huaishi sighed and explained helplessly. Equipment is bound, you know, right? I'm the only one who can use this sword. Can I trouble you to take it again? The person who was searching Huaishi was furious and pointed his gun at Huaishi's head. Then, he saw Huaishi raise his eyes and look at his face. He said, take it again. Hurry up. There was not the slightest hesitation or panic in his calm expression. Instead, it was as if he was giving an order that could not be disobeyed, urging him not to waste time. Do as I say. This is for your own good. The person who was searching Huaishi swallowed his saliva and looked at his captain. Seeing the change in his captain's expression, he quickly glanced at him. Finally, he mustered up his courage, swallowed his saliva, and reached out his hand again. This time, under Huaishi's guidance, he finally succeeded. He took out the outermost document from his satchel. Then, he saw the black cover. The logo from the Astronomy Society was shining brightly. The person's hand trembled, as if he had been stung by a scorpion again, and the document fell to the ground. The atmosphere became solemn and cold again. Someone raised a muzzle, but the person who was searching Huaishi screamed, Don't shoot. Don't shoot. I'm fine. The atmosphere froze for a moment. Soon, after seeing the logo on the document clearly, everyone felt a chill run down their spines, even though they were under the tyrannical sun. They shuddered, especially after the document that had fallen to the ground was finally unfolded slowly, showing them the identity of the Astronomy Society's registered military officer and inspector. Everyone froze as they realized what they had just done. Cold sweat quickly seeped out of their backs. No one was stupid enough to think that this place was remote and desolate. As long as everyone kept it a secret, no one would know what they had done to the little bastard in front of them. If the Astronomy Society took the initiative to restrain its actions within the scope of the 5 Pillars sovereignty, then outside the scope of the 5 Pillars, the Astronomy Society was a behemoth enough to make anyone and organization fear it. Even if it was just an unworthy second stage ascendant member, if he really died in their hands, then the entire desolate child would inevitably pay a terrible price for the Astronomy Society's thunderous fury. Moreover, it wasn't certain who would die. The Ascendant swallowed his saliva, looked down at Huaishi's document, and then looked at the young man's face. Unbelievable. It can't be fake, right? Someone behind him doubted. Immediately, without waiting for Huaishi to answer, the Ascendant turned around and raised his hand to slap the idiot's face, almost knocking the idiot's head off his neck. "What are you still standing there for?" He angrily shouted at his subordinates. "Put down your guns." All the guns and cannons were put away as if by magic. It was simply shocking to see their miraculous hand speed. The Ascendant had already bent down and picked up the long sword from the ground. He didn't care that his hands were constantly making chi-chi sounds as he respectfully bowed and offered it with both hands. "I apologize for the offense just now, sir." Without any scruples about his dignity, he knelt on the ground. "Please forgive our offense." In the silence that made everyone sweat profusely, Huaisher looked down at his terrified appearance. After a long time, he suddenly laughed. "It's just like I said." He reached out and picked up the sword of virtue, putting it back in his saddlebag. He suddenly said, "Your cars are really good, aren't they?" This time, there was no need for the leader to give an order. Everyone jumped out of the cars without saying anything. The drivers offered the keys, afraid that he wouldn't accept. They didn't even bring the water and food. Huaisher scratched his head, looking at the strange vehicle in front of him that he had never seen before. "I don't know how to drive it, even if you gave it to me." "Then I'll do it." The Ascendant lowered his head. "May I ask where you want to go?" "Canberra," Huaisher replied. "How long will it take?" "For 3 hours is enough." "Then what are we waiting for?" Huaisher turned around and put away the tent, stuffing it back into his bag. Then he walked to the boat and found a comfortable chair to sit on. "Let's set off quickly." Ignoring the confused questions of his companions through the radio, the Ascendant personally piloted the Black Sail steamboat and sped off in the direction they had come from. It took only 2.5 hours to cover a distance of several hundred kilometers. 3 hours later, Huaisher was sitting in the most luxurious hotel in Canberra, enjoying the presidential suite to himself. 5 minutes later, the hotel's internal phone rang. The waiter respectfully asked him, "Member of Canberra's City Hall, leader of the Barren Children, Mr. Sand King, has specially booked the revolving restaurant on the top floor. Would you like to have dinner with us?" Huaisher scratched his head. He felt that his plan of playing the pig to eat the tiger had taken a wrong turn. Something seemed wrong with the plot. Chapter 456. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be that the other party had eyes, but didn't recognize Mount Tai and mistook Tiger for Page. Then, they acted like a snob and attacked at the slightest disagreement. After being taught a lesson by Huaisher, they continued to pester him. After killing the cannon fodder, the cadres would come. After killing the cadres, the leaders would come. In the end, the leader of the Baron's sons, Sand King, was furious and personally attacked Huaisher. Then, Huaisher made a phone call and turned him into ashes under the bombardment of the Bifrost. Why was the plot wrong from the beginning? Huaisher scratched her head, unable to figure it out. But he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. At least he wasn't dragged into any trouble this time. As for Sand King's invitation, after some consideration, Huaisher agreed. A level 5 sublimator was a big boss no matter where, especially a crown one. It could be said that he was one of the rulers of Australia. He was giving face to the Astronomy Association, not to a small fry like him. No matter what, he couldn't be shameless. Besides, there was free food everywhere. How could he not eat? There was still some time before dinner. Huaisher took out his phone, intending to check the background of Sand King. However, just as he turned on his phone, a series of natural disaster alerts popped up. Yes, it was about the radiation storm a week ago. Huaisher looked up expressionlessly and looked at the embarrassed crow beside him. "Is this what you said? Since you want excitement, you should follow through to the end?" "Aya, when did I say something so shameless?" Crow covered her face shyly. "You're so slutty." Huaisher rolled her eyes and didn't want to talk to her anymore. Sooner or later, she would be angered to death. Through the authority of the Astronomy Association, he quickly found out the details of Sand King's deeds. Reed Turner, 51 years old, an Australian sublimator. At the age of 39, he inherited the title of the previous Sand King and became the new crowned one, as well as the leader of the Baron Sons. However, the strange thing was that, as an expert, he rarely fought with others. There was basically no record of him fighting in public. Moreover, the brutal image of the Sons of Baron was swept away. In just a few years, they had completed the internal changes of the organization and the change of route and actively participated in Australian politics. Now, he had become an indispensable member of the Australian government, and the Desolate Sons had changed from a warlord to a border army of Australia. It could be said that this person had made an indelible contribution to the stability of Australia. He didn't rely on violence to achieve his career. Instead, he relied on his outstanding leadership and popularity to reach where he was today. Even his former competitor, the son of the previous Sand King, had rejected the inheritance of the crown before his father's death, choosing to pass the honor to his elder brother who had grown up with him. In the photo, Sand King was smiling. He was filled with a warm aura. There was no trace of the solemn and tyrannical aura on the black sail. It was hard to imagine that this person was one of the most influential people in the present world. According to the estimation of the Central Bureau, the cultivation points accumulated by the previous Sand Kings were at least 9%. The Sand King's crown itself represented the endless desert of Australia, as well as the countless mineral deposits that had been excavated in it. As long as this desert still existed and the mineral deposits were not exhausted, then it would constantly affect the present world. After hundreds of years, it wasn't strange to be able to accumulate 9% of the correction value. According to Crow's explanation of the correction value, people thirsted for change. No, it should be said that as long as people existed, change would be born. And this change to the entire world was the embodiment of the correction value and the degree of distortion. Breathing would also produce a correction value. Even if this effect was so weak that it could be ignored, only 0.001 in a billion, it still had an impact on the present world. It was just that the changes that high-level ascendants sometimes made to the world were too great, causing this change to be observable. Whether it was the correction value or the degree of distortion, there were the names and quantifications of this change. If the impact on the world was positive, then it was called the correction value. On the contrary, if the entire world was deteriorated, then it was called the degree of distortion. Under certain conditions, the correction value and the degree of distortion could also be passed on. As long as one had a treasure that was compatible with one's sacred mark, whether it was a sacred mark relic of the same lineage, a miracle mark, or a relic of authority, it didn't matter. After going through a complicated secret ritual, one could integrate it into one's sacred mark and use it as the main body to maintain the correction value. This way, after the ascendant died, their life's efforts would not be in vain. It would also allow their descendants to inherit this gift from their ancestors, saving them a lot of time and allowing them to inherit the fire and achievements of their ancestors. It was said that when using some of the highest level miracle marks, a large amount of correction value would even be needed to be burned to unleash its true power to the extent that it could change the world. But that was too far away from Huaishur. Crow had never told him that he had to work hard to find his own goal in life. If he didn't work hard, he would only be able to go back and inherit the tens of billions of inheritance in the utopia in the future. He would no longer be able to work and struggle freely. Moreover, in a sense, this portion of the correction value was jointly held by the Utopia and Golden Dawn. If he wanted to fish meat from the Golden Dawn's bowl, he had to be strong enough. Otherwise, let alone meat, he wouldn't even be able to drink the soup. He could only watch the Golden Dawn's abyss otakus eat hot dry noodles. From the day he picked up the Book of Destiny, Huaishur was destined to be an enemy of Golden Dawn. Moreover, he was a big problem for them, and the Central Bureau might not be willing to let this correction value fall into the hands of others. In the face of excessive value, Huaishur's personal will was too insignificant. Moreover, he still had the Book of Destiny, which represented the master of celestial genealogy. If it weren't for the layers of fog concealing the whereabouts of the Book of Destiny, as well as the Book of Destiny's interference with prophecies, Huaishur would have been dead long ago. How could he still be so happy being a traitor like he was now? This was something she deliberately hid from Huaishur. In the beginning, it was because she wanted to pursue the stability of the plan so that her contractor wouldn't collapse under too much pressure. Now, the reason was gradually changing. From the bottom of her heart, she hoped that in addition to rebuilding the utopia, Huaishur could have his own pursuits, his own achievements, and a life of his own. You have to work hard, Huaishur, Crow suddenly said. What's wrong? The young man raised his head blankly. No, it's nothing. Crow chuckled softly. Big sister has high hopes for you. She's up to something again. Huaishur couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He got up and walked into the bathroom. At least someone was treating him to a meal. Let's clean up. Half an hour later, in a revolving restaurant on the top floor, Sand King, who was sitting next to the table, finally met this rookie from the Astronomy Society. As one of the actual rulers of Australia, he had already investigated Huaishur's background through his own channels after his subordinates reported to him. At least on the surface, all the details were clear. Even so, he couldn't connect the young man who walked into the restaurant with the unkempt traveler in the video. After washing away the dust and changing into a suit he bought at the last minute, the young man became completely different from what he expected. It was stunning. There was no frivolity of a young man, nor was there the arrogance he expected. His smile was gentle and calm. His beautiful appearance was enough to make people have a good impression, but Sand King was already past the age of looking at appearance. What surprised him was the rare, high-spirited demeanor of the young man. He was like a knight marching forward with fire in the dark night. The moist wind blowing in the desert made people feel at ease and happy. They wanted to get along with him. They wanted to be friends with such a person. At this moment, Sand King no longer had any doubts about the complicated resume. After so many years, his understanding, experience, and even intuition told him that such a person should achieve something. If he could continue to maintain this demeanor, one day, he would be able to become the role model of the Astronomy Society, right? In a rare move, the crowned Australian got up from his seat and nodded politely to his guest. It wasn't because he was afraid of the Astronomy Society's power, but because he should show respect to a real guest. Welcome to Australia, Mr. Huaishur. The white-haired, genial old man reached out and shook Huaishur's hand. Thank you for your hospitality, Your Excellency, Sand King. Huaishur didn't reject the old man's kindness and made it clear that he was a guest. Since Sand King was being so polite, it would be embarrassing if he took advantage of him. Not only did he not mention the offense of those people, but he also thanked Sand King. After all, it was the Son of Desolation's car that brought him to Canberra. Everyone tacitly put this little bit of unhappiness to the back of their minds. After the appetizer was served, Sand King pondered for a moment and said, "You are a delightful guest, Mr. Huaishur. I don't want to hide anything from an honest guest like you, nor do I want to play tricks. Therefore, allow me to ask you a direct question." He looked at Huaishur cautiously and asked, "Did you come because of the Astronomy Society, or it's purely personal?" Before he could finish, Huaishur had already answered. Sand King relaxed a little. Then his expression became serious and solemn. "So, are you here to participate in the fight for the Golden Amber?" "No." Huaishur shook his head. "I'm traveling." In a short silence, Sand King quietly studied his face. His gaze wasn't sharp or aggressive, nor did it show any suspicion. It was as if he was just waiting for Huaishur to finish speaking. Soon, his expression relaxed, and he took the initiative to raise his wine glass. "Then, I wish you a pleasant trip," Sand King toasted. "To express my sincere gratitude, I, as the host, will bear all your expenses in Canberra." "There's no need for that." Huaishur shook his head. "I'm guessing you have something important to do. If you're worried, you can arrange for people to follow me. I'm not interested in the fight in Australia. Besides, I'll be leaving soon. I'm not a hidden danger that you should be worried about, Your Excellency, Sand King. In fact, I'm not interested in what's going on here." He paused and said seriously, "You should be worried about whether the Astronomy Society will agree to your plan. I believe that I'm not on the opposite side of the world, Sand King replied frankly. I'm happy to let the Astronomy Society participate in this, but in fact, the Astronomy Society doesn't care if my plan succeeds or not. So, everything that needed to be confirmed before the meal was over. Are you sure I'm not a troublemaker? I'm sure you won't cause trouble. We can continue to be friends, even if it's just on the surface. Sand King didn't have to worry about the S-ranked military officer of the Astronomy Society being hostile to him. Huaishir also didn't have to worry about not being able to leave after the meal. But, do you mind if I ask you a question? Huaishir asked. Please go ahead. Sand King took a sip of his aperitif, put down his glass, and waited quietly for Huaishir to speak. Huaishir was silent for a moment before asking directly, what exactly is the golden amber that you mentioned? Thank you for your tolerance. I'll work hard and write another chapter. Also, I'll recommend a new book. I'm really an intern. It's just that my face is a little dark. Difficult diseases? Emergency treatment? Calm down. That's my daily routine. This was the story of a young doctor with bad luck who was forced to go on the road of saving lives. Chapter 457. You shouldn't have asked that. In order to maintain a harmonious atmosphere, Huaishir knew that he should appear indifferent, no matter how curious he was. But he just wanted to know, instead of going back and secretly investigating, why not find out the truth directly in front of them? If the atmosphere between the two of them was not very pleasant, then his words could be interpreted as unappreciative. But since they had a good conversation, why not put the question out in the open? He did not intend to get involved. It was purely gossip. Sand King was silent for a moment, looking at Huaishir's expression as if he was trying to find any signs of regret. But in the end, he realized that the young man in front of him might be purely curious. In fact, he did not care whether Huaishir would change his mind or not. As the one who had been crowned, he did not care if he had another second-order enemy. Even if the enemy was from the Astronomy Society and had all kinds of achievements and resumes. He had been preparing for this for many years and paid a great price for it. No matter who it was, he would not stop. Therefore, he did not intend to hide it. After a moment of silence, he raised his head and drank the appetizer in one gulp. He waved his hand to refuse the waiter's service and put the wine glass aside. The so-called golden amber is just a name. In essence, its main body is the skull of Demeter, the fifth-order sublimator of the previous generation of Rome. That is the philosopher's stone she left behind. Sand King calmly explained. Demeter, one of the main branches of the Roman genealogy, the fifth-order stigmata of the Greek genealogy, inherited the miracle of the god of farming and harvest. Her position in the Roman genealogy was similar to that of Emperor Qing in the Eastern Summer genealogy. For the entire genealogy, there might be one or two less helpers, but such an existence would always be an indispensable member. It must be known that in addition to planting abyss plants, the miracle of farming and harvest often referred to a special skill that could accelerate the growth of the sublimator. It was said that as long as the Emperor Qing touched it, the age of all plants would increase by a certain amount. The amount of age depended on the Emperor Qing's will, and the upper limit was the age of the sublimator. There was no consumption, just like breathing. In other words, the older Emperor Qing was, the more terrifying the power of the divine mark would be. Even though not all herbs and plants were of the highest age, the range of applications was still terrifying. Huaishir didn't know the effect of Demeter's stigmata, but since it could be compared to Emperor Qing, it was naturally very precious. However, Huaishir was even more confused. Will the Roman genealogy allow it to wander outside? Before she passed away, she returned the correction value accumulated by her ancestors to the Hall of Rome, Sand King replied. And according to her wishes, her body was processed into a stigmata relic. He said, it's a one-time consumable. Huaishir could not imagine the details, but he could still imagine the complicated inside story and the countless struggles and compromises behind it. Something that could make a level 5 ascendant willingly offer up his body was definitely no small matter. After pausing for a moment, Sand King sighed and revealed the most important information. Its effect is to use up the correction value to turn at least 300,000 square kilometers of land into fertile land with a bountiful harvest every year. Huaishir was stunned. He vaguely guessed something, but it was precisely because of this that he found it hard to believe. You want to use it? Huaishir asked. Or do you plan to destroy it? Destroy the hope of redemption with my own hands, Sand King retorted. Do I give people the impression that I'm a ruthless and crazy ambitious person? Mr. Huaishir, is there anyone who would go to such lengths just to consolidate their power? It was precisely because of this that Huaishir found it hard to believe. The source of Sand King's correction value came from this desert and the countless miners who continuously excavated high-quality ores. It could be said that this crown was built on top of Australia's current pain. As long as the desert could retreat an inch, then his power would be reduced by a bit. As long as one person could find a way out, no longer being a miner in a precarious situation, then his authority would be reduced by a bit. It could be said that if Sand King wanted to use it, he would be digging his own grave. Why? Huaishir asked. Because I need it, Sand King calmly replied. Because Australia needs it. Could it be that other than me, there's someone else with enough cultivation to use this treasure? That's why it has to be me. He said, this sacrifice has to be made by me. Huaishir fell silent. He looked at the old man in front of him. He suddenly understood why he did not reveal his extraordinary strength, did not use violence, and did not use his extraordinary authority and status. Yet he was able to obtain such high popularity and crazily followed by so many people. He didn't see himself as a king, even if he wore a solemn crown on his head. It was not his strength that caused people to admire and respect him, but the promise he had made and the magnanimous attitude he had now shown. Even if the person in front of him might be his competitor, he would still treat him with respect. Even if they became enemies in the future, he would not give up on expressing his wishes and fighting for the other party's support. Even if their true statuses were as different as heaven and earth, a rank 2 ascendant and a noble crown could still share a meal at the same table. It didn't matter if what he said was a lie or how sincere it was. Such magnanimity made Huaishir feel reverence. He thought for a long time and asked, Do you want to save Australia? Your Excellency, Sand King? That's not something I can do. Sand King shook his head. Even if I use up all my correction value, the only thing I can change is the land around Canberra, right? But I believe that even if it's just a small change, it's enough for the dying Australia. For us, nothing is more precious than hope. Aren't you afraid that others will object? Huaishir asked. As far as I know, mining exports are Australia's biggest source of income. Countless people benefit from this process. But my companions and my children are suffering in this process. Sand King said, If anyone objects, I will persuade them. If anyone stands in my way, I will kill them. Compared to this hope, everything else is not worth mentioning. Even if your subordinates and former companions are among those who object. Huaishir asked. No, they're on my side. Sand King smiled proudly. From the beginning, I have never hidden my goal from them. Mr. Huaishir, this is the promise I made to the previous Sand King, my brothers and my children. The Sand King's legacy will end in my hands. I want to save our country, which has suffered so much. He stared out the window of the revolving restaurant. Under the gray sky, the yellow sand stretched as far as the eye could see. At the very least, I want to save my hometown, this barren land. Is that all? Huaishir asked. Maybe more than that, Sand King replied. I don't deny that from a certain perspective, my goal is not simple. But there's nothing shameful about wanting power, is there? If I want someone to respect and thank me for what I've done, I can't say that I have bad intentions, right? Indeed. Huaishir nodded in agreement. It felt good to have someone thank him. He had no reason to refute. Wasn't this the reason why sublimators did good deeds? Then, I think we can start dinner. Sand King smiled. What followed was a perfect dinner. Both the host and the guest enjoyed themselves. When Sand King said goodbye, Huaishir walked the old man all the way to the car outside the hotel. Before leaving, Sand King shook Huaishir's hand solemnly. As far as I know, you should be the mountain ghost sacred mark, right? He invited, Are you willing to participate in this? No need. Huaisher smiled and shrugged. Thank you for your hospitality. Unfortunately, I'm in a hurry. Sand King nodded. Then, forgive me for not being able to see you off. I wish you a safe trip. I will. Huaisher smiled and stood there, watching the car drive away. He turned around and returned to the hotel. He removed the bow tie that was in the way and finally took a breath. This was the bad thing about chatting with important people. It was easy to get nervous. Although there was a lot of pleasantries, the conversation was still sincere and honest. He had almost been dragged into the great cause of Australia's transformation by the Sand King. Are you really not tempted at all? Crow stood on the chair with a faint smile. If you get the golden amber, even for young Master Ming, it will be a considerable boost. Of course I'm tempted. Huaisher shook his head and lay on the bed. He suddenly said, There's so many good things in the world. It doesn't make sense that they all belong to me, right? You've given up? Yes, I've given up. Huaisher nodded. Although it's embarrassing to say it, I've been convinced. Even if I get the golden amber, I'm afraid I'll give it to the local astronomy club and let them decide whether to help Sand King or not. The local astronomy club might not give up their neutral position. Then we'll stay neutral. Huaisher shook his head. At least we won't have to worry about them doing bad things, right? You're really open-minded. I just know how much I'm worth. Huaisher reached out and pulled out the sword of virtue from his saddlebag. He looked at the broken blade and touched the gap on it. If I've gained anything these days, it's probably fear. Fear! Fear is not a shameful thing, right? Huaisher said. I just don't want to rely too much on luck. You've grown up, Huaisher. Thanks to you. Crow laughed shamelessly. Then you have to thank me properly. Yes. Huaisher closed his eyes tiredly. I want to thank you for 8 lifetimes. You don't have to be so dramatic. A lifetime is enough. Before falling asleep, Huaisher heard these words in his ear. He couldn't help but laugh. He fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 458. During the night, Huaisher was awakened twice by the explosions in Canberra. He got out of bed and poured himself a glass of water. Standing in front of the window, he saw the rising flames in the distance and the faint silhouettes of ascendants jumping between the tall buildings. After watching for a while, he looked away without interest and went back to sleep. He slept all the way until the sun rose. After breakfast, a waiter came up and said in a low voice, "A messenger from His Excellency Sand King is here. Do you have time to meet him?" "Sure." Huaisher wiped his mouth and sat on the chair. He saw the ascendant with sunglasses walk in. It was a familiar face. It was the one who drove Huaisher yesterday. The visitor bowed respectfully. "His Excellency Sand King sends his greetings. It seems that you had a good harvest last night." Huaisher asked. "It's just some unbearable internal strife. It's not worth mentioning." The Sand King subordinate said, "His Excellency Sand King ordered me to bring you a gift. It's just some help within my ability. It's not an exaggeration. I hope you won't refuse." Huaisher was stunned for a moment. He watched as the man opened the box in his hand and carefully placed an envelope and a bottle in front of Huaisher. Inside the envelope was a ticket to the South Pole. The contents of the bottle were frightening. It was a few golden specks of dust. They looked like crystals of amber. There was so little of it that it didn't even last for a moment. However, the rich aura it contained was suffocating. "This is golden amber?" Huaisher was in disbelief. "It's just some insignificant fragments." The messenger took a step back and replied respectfully, "This little amount is not enough to affect the ceremony. However, His Excellency Sand King thinks that it might be of help to you." Huaisher was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. "I came here as a guest of the Sand King. The Sand King has already invited me to a banquet. I made a promise. I don't think this is something a guest should accept. Please take it back." His Excellency Sand King said that this is an investment. As if he had expected this, the emissary raised his head and said, "This has nothing to do with the Astronomical Society. If you can become a friend of Australia in the future, then this will be a reward for your kindness." "You think so highly of me." Huaisher was stunned. "He said that a man like you ought to succeed," said the emissary, "because you are like him." Huaisher did not know how to respond. Was it the same? Huaisher didn't know. He wasn't even sure what Sand King was referring to and didn't know how to refute him. After a long while, He looked at the bottle in front of him and couldn't help but sigh. To be honest, he should have refused. Was the Sand King trying to humiliate him? But the things he gave her were simply too fragrant. Even if it was like a speck of dust compared to the main body of a miracle, the nobility of this speck of dust could not be bought with money. Please tell him I've accepted it. Huaisher picked up the small bottle, raised his hand, and directly stuffed it into the hole in his chest. It was better to keep such a precious item close to his body. Okay. The emissary nodded and took 2 steps back. I will be waiting for you downstairs. Before you leave Canberra, if you need anything, feel free to tell me. I will. Huaisher nodded. It was still the emissary who drove the car. In the morning, Huaisher restocked his saddlebag in Canberra and picked out some local specialties and items that he no longer needed in his backpack to send back to Exine High. Naturally, he did not forget to give Ol Lu a helping of Overlord. Even though he did not have the chance to visit Shambhala anymore, he still had to show his appreciation. It was just like how Ol Lu would post pictures of himself with various beautiful big sisters and large robots on WeChat whenever he was free. The friendship between the two of them, which hurt each other, could last forever. Then, Huaisher went to the Astronomical Society's base in Australia to do a simple report and registration to prove that he had been there and had not done anything wrong. However, when he heard that Huaisher had walked over from Darwin, the local person in charge could not help but reveal a look of surprise, as if she was lying to a ghost. After confirming that Huaisher was telling the truth, their expression became even more bizarre. How could there be such a young madman? At noon, he and the local representative even found time to have a working lunch at the canteen. After all, it was an astronomical society, and they were all in good company. Even if it was a working lunch, it was not that bad. The local was very polite, and they did not have any suspicion or rejection toward outsiders like Huaisher. Huaisher also confirmed Sand King's plan from the local representative. From the looks of it, the last stumbling block has been removed by him. The middle-aged representative put down the wine glass and wiped his mouth. His plan will most likely succeed. After all, with such a large amount of cultivation base, after repairing the land near Canberra, he should be able to clean up the radiation in the Bay Area as well. Is that what Dong Xia said? Is the Astronomical Society not involved? Huaisher asked. Due to certain reasons, we do not intend to interfere too much with Australia's current situation. The representative did not tell Huaisher the secrets of the Continuation Institute and the buffer zone. Obviously, these secrets were not something that could be casually divulged. Sand King is a wise man who knows when to advance and retreat. He knows where his bottom line is, and he will not act rashly. The representative pondered for a moment. However, it is wise for you not to participate. After all, there are several international mining companies that monopolize the market, and they are not happy to see Australia's supply of goods suffer. These days, there have been many disputes. If there is any conflict, your identity will be very awkward, and you may be used as an excuse. Huaisher laughed. I'm just a second-order ascendant. What did I do? The representative could not help but laugh. If you were just an ordinary second-order ascendant, that would be true. He did not say anything else. He raised his glass and toasted, ending the lunch, and wished Huaisher a safe journey. During the conversation, he hinted that he hoped Huaisher would leave as soon as possible. The longer he stayed in Australia, the more likely he would be involved. Even if Sand King did not intend to do so, his opponents would do their best to muddy the waters. Coincidentally, Huaisher did not plan to stay any longer. He did not even go back to the hotel. Anyway, he had brought all his belongings with him. After he left, he asked the driver to take him to the dock. Before boarding the ship, he once again heard an explosion in the distance behind him. When he turned around, he realized that it was in the direction of the hotel. He could not help but frown. After the driver received a call, his expression suddenly became apologetic. He lowered his head and told Huaisher that it was not Sand King's intention. I know. Huaisher nodded and looked down at the report that had just been sent out. But now, some people want to see what the Astronomy Club wants. He had already given the excuse to the local representative. He was not worried about being taken advantage of. You should go back. Sand King will probably need more people. Huaisher stood in front of the stairs and said to the driver, "I should go too. Australia is not a place where I should stay for long. I wish you a safe trip." "Same to you." Huaisher looked at him deeply. After handing the ticket to the crew, he was led into the cabin. Next, it was time to focus on the journey. Antarctica. In fact, this ship took a long detour. It did not go directly to the South Pole, but it was the earliest to arrive. Because Australia did not have a direct flight to the South Pole, there was no need. On the contrary, the ore trade between Australia and America was very frequent. This ship was used for both passengers and goods, but there were not many passengers. According to the route, they would first go to America. After dropping off the precious goods, they would transfer a batch of equipment to the scientific research station in the South Pole. There, they could drop off Huaisher. According to Huaisher's plan, after the trip was over and the birth of life was settled, he could go to Mount Diyu in Dongxia to replenish the last of the plant vitality and prepare for the advancement. According to the message left by the Giant Goose Company yesterday, they had found the undying flame and were looking for clues. However, if they found it successfully, Huaisher would need to make up the rest of the balance. This was because the flame of the undying was much larger than he had expected. This was a good thing. Huaisher would not reject it. So now, the only thing he lacked was the blood hatred crystal. Thinking of this, he opened Weibo and found the popular "Bring Me Junior" and sent a private message. "Hello, Zyma?" The other party replied at the speed of light. "No, Simon." Huaisher raised his eyebrows. Then, he lightly tapped on the keyboard and replied with a, "On the other hand, little 19, who is used to doing business with a foul mouth, did not feel any negative emotions after sending the reply. He frowned and looked down at the name of the person who sent the private message. Little Peppa from Huaihai Road. Who was this? Where had he heard this name before? Wait, F*CK. He was stunned for a long time before he finally remembered. Immediately, he was sweating profusely and could not help but shiver. Negative emotions from Little House in the Woods, plus 999. His hands had been impulsive, and he had lost 2 days of business. He was so blind that he did not see clearly and provoked this killing god. Feeling the ominous aura above his head, he swallowed dryly and quickly replied, "Sorry, it's not me. I'm his cousin, Lin Yu." Huaisher was silent for a long time before replying, "Little brother, don't mess around. Blood hatred crystal, do you have a way?" Yes. Little 19 did not care about pretending to be someone else and replied crazily, "Big brother, how many do you want? I'll give you an internal price. There are 2 of my New Year's money this year, 50% off." At this point, he hesitated for a moment before he painfully deleted the 50% discount and changed it to 30%. This time, he suffered a great loss. 300 ounces, a whole piece, do you have it? This time, after Huaisher sent, Lin 19 fell into a long silence. Huaisher thought for a moment and added, "I'll buy you at the normal market price. I won't take advantage of you." Lin 19 replied with a long row of ellipses. "Big brother, this is not a matter of money. I really can't help you with this amount. 300 ounces? What a joke." Ever since Lin 19 was young, all his New Year's money added up would make him smile until he woke up with 10 ounces, let alone a whole piece. Is it too much? To be honest, no one can save up the amount you want. Why don't I introduce my 9th uncle to you? He's someone who values money more than his life. As long as you give him the money, he'll immediately go to the Uezhou border and kill 160,000 Igos. Don't. Huaisher was so scared that his hands trembled. 160,000 lives. His hands trembled just thinking about it. Even Nigos could not do it. Why was the advancement of this deluxe version of Young Master Si Ming so sinful? Chapter 459. The so-called Blood Vengeance Crystal was essentially the same as Calamity Ash, Death Fog, and the Death Poison that Huaisher no longer used. They were all origin crystals formed by a special origin substance. The conditions for the Calamity Ash's birth were a lot of pain. Once it spread, it would form the effect of a halo of fear. The Death Poison was a limited extraction on this basis. It was the fear of death that Huaishur had transformed into after repeatedly experiencing death. The conditions for the blood vengeance crystal's birth were even harsher and more unacceptable to ordinary people. It was a precious crystal formed from the resentment and venom left behind by a large number of lives at the moment of death. It was even mixed with a substantial curse. It was an indispensable material for most high-level curse ceremonies and negative curses. Once a little was added, the effect of the curse would multiply. Apart from the Lin family's path of sin, who could eat this thing as a supplement, the other ascendants would stay away. Apart from the Lin family, no one else in Doomsday had such a mature and efficient extraction method. If one wanted to buy the blood vengeance crystal, there was no better way than the Lin family. However, in today's world, it was very difficult to kill people and set fires. Even the landlord's family probably didn't have much surplus food. Huaishur opened his mouth and asked for 300 ounces, and it was a whole piece formed at once. This request was simply devoid of conscience. Little 19 of the Lin family wiped the cold sweat off his face. He secretly rejoiced that he hadn't offended this judge of the Astronomy Society. This bastard was even fiercer than the Lin family. Between the two of us, which one of us is walking the path of sin? He opened his mouth and took hundreds of thousands of lives. Wasn't he too cruel? However, this was a rare big business. If he could succeed, he might be able to get a commission from it. Wouldn't it be wonderful to take his smelly mouth business to the next level? With this in mind, he called Uncle Gio. After a burst of noise on the other end, an impatient voice came through. Huaishur? What's the hurry, young man? Tell him not to rush me. I'm already doing it. HM. Little 19 was stunned. What's going on? I say, little house, you didn't get tricked, did you? Did you offend him? On the other end of the phone, Uncle Gio immediately reacted. Let's make it clear in advance. If anything happens to you and you get detained by him, Uncle Gio won't even talk about the price. At most, I'll lend you $3 million to settle this matter. I won't give you a single cent discount. Wait, little Hud in the woods stood there for a long time. Suddenly, he had a bad feeling. He placed an order with you? Yes, 1.5 months ago. In the roar, Uncle Gio's voice was steady and calm. 500 ounces of blood hatred crystal. A big order of 400 million. Your 4th uncle, 16th uncle, and I have been busy these days because of this matter. We finally found a herd of livestock 12 meters deep in the forest. In an instant, little 19 felt as if he was struck by lightning. The voice on the phone was still coming. I'm telling you, if you mess this up, even if Uncle Gio doesn't care about it, your 4th uncle and 16th uncle will come to you for tutoring. Do you understand? You mustn't act for others. The people from the Astronomical Society are all very bad. Who knows, they might be fishing to enforce the law. Hiss. Little 19 sucked in a breath of cold air. Then, he couldn't help but suck in another breath. He had been sucking in the same place for 10 minutes. After successfully increasing the carbon emissions of the whole territory for this year, he finally calmed down. His heart was cold. Seeing the sent by Huaishur on the phone, his cold heart had already sunk to the bottom. It's over. I've been tricked. Huaishur, you're so cruel. Little 19 looked up to the sky and sighed in grief and indignation. He had planned this long ago. 2 days ago, when they met on the Stellaris, why was his expression so strange? Why was he smiling so happily when he looked at him? Had he started planning since then? If he had been blinded by greed and accepted this order, he might have been caught red-handed by Huaishur. At that time, the Astronomical Society would have sent a black letter, and he would have been in big trouble. Fortunately, he had always been as timid as an old dog and didn't touch anything that was life-threatening. Otherwise, he would have been kicked into a pit by Huaishur if he had even the slightest bit of hope. But now, the situation wasn't any better. His heart, which had been filled with evil tricks since he was young, had already imagined what would happen next. Huaishur would use his bad mouth as a pretext to make a fuss and make a big deal out of it. It would be best if he had a direct conflict with him, who didn't know anything. Then, as if he had tricked his cousin to court death, Huaishur would be tricked out of the Lin family and detained. At that time, Huaishur would use him to bargain with the Lin family. At this moment, Little 19 of the Lin family couldn't help but burst into tears. As expected of the Astronomical Society's internal evaluation of the S-Class Double Red Rod, even the ancestors of his family thought that he was a rare talent on the path of evil. Just this scheme alone had already made him feel cold from the heels of his feet to the back of his head. How was this a King Prince of Paradise? This was more ruthless than Green Sun, more vicious than Golden Dawn. Now that he thought about it, everything that Huaishir had done had already begun to change. Sorry, cousin. I've wronged you. It's not that you're too stupid, it's just that your luck is bad. You didn't check the almanac when you went out. You met such a monster, and in the end, you didn't even realize that you had become a stepping stone. Fortunately, his luck was good. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know what had happened when he was kidnapped and used as a hostage. After he finished calculating, Lin 19 seemed to have already seen the star of death hanging high above his head. He didn't know how many traps were waiting for him ahead. He was just sitting at home, and all he did was have a bad mouth. How did he end up like this? If he could escape this time, he must stay far away from that bastard in the future. The farther the better. After he used his few pious prayers to make an oath to the true Dragon Juin who had been dead for God knows how many years, he swallowed his saliva, summoned the last of his courage, and picked up his phone. Then he quickly knelt down and begged for mercy. 23 million, that's all I have. Big brother, spare my dog life. I won't have a bad mouth in the future. On the ship, Huaishir felt like he was upside down. What happened? What was going on? Why did he suddenly become like this? Give me a month, just 1 month, I'll borrow it from someone. Little 19 gritted his teeth and stomped his feet. If it's not enough, I still have a house in Yanjing. Huaishir's whole body had turned 360 degrees. He was completely confused and didn't know what had happened. Were we just talking about brother and I? Why did it suddenly become like this? What do you mean? He sent a message to ask. Was this too little? Lin 19 held back a mouthful of old blood, his fingers trembling as he replied. Nothing, if it's not enough. I still have a little meaning. Huaishir frowned. He didn't understand what he was doing. I don't know what you mean. Actually, Lin 19 replied with tears in his eyes. I don't mean anything else, just a little something. Huaishir rolled his eyes. He felt that he couldn't continue this conversation anymore. He couldn't help but sigh. Fine, his request was too much. He was probably under a lot of pressure for little 19, so it was natural for him to refuse. After all, they weren't close. Fine, I'm the one who's embarrassed. After he replied, he turned off his phone, scratched his head, and tried to think of another way. Then, 2 minutes later, the magic gold bank app on his phone made a ding sound, and a message popped up. Received 16 million yuan transfer from an anonymous account. Huaishir lowered his head and looked at the transfer notification. He fell into a daze. He didn't know what had happened. Someone had inexplicably made money for him. How interesting. In the end, he figured out where the money came from, and then returned the money to little 19. But the attitude of Little Cabin in the Woods was very strange. It was Huaishir who returned the money, but it seemed like Huaishir was going to kill him with a knife. He was so unwilling that he felt like he was about to cry. Had he unknowingly become a scourge to little 19? It couldn't be. Huaishir pinched his chin and sat in the coffee shop of the ship, thinking. He heard the sound of the chair opposite him being pulled out. Excuse me, is there anyone here? A graceful and mature female voice asked. Huaishir looked up and saw a woman in a long black dress. She seemed to be shrouded in the night, and even her bare hands were wearing black lace gloves. Her eyes were covered by a black veil hanging down from her top hat, making her whole face feel blurred. It was hard to remember. What made Huaishir even more puzzled was that there were not many people in this coffee shop at all. It should be said that there were not many passengers on the ship at all. After the ship set off, Huaishir hadn't seen many guests on the ship. Why did she have to sit opposite him? However, he didn't mind having someone to talk to on the trip. After putting down the phone, Huaishir nodded and said, "Help yourself." "Thank you." The hoarse and low voice sounded particularly distant. Huaishir felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell. He just felt that the mature and graceful woman in front of him seemed to be a bit similar to the captain who sailed the ship wildly. However, he couldn't tell where the similarity was at all. Huaisher was sure that he hadn't seen her anywhere. Such a mysterious woman should be able to remember even if he had only seen her once. But he had no impression of her at all. However, one thing was certain. He had heard her voice somewhere before, but Huaisher couldn't remember it at the moment. It felt as if there was a layer of drifting fog in front of him, but it wasn't so important that he didn't need to care about it. He didn't need to worry about it. It was just a little strange. Wasn't everyone like this when they went out these days? Hello, Huaisher. He politely stretched out his hand. How should I address you? Just call me that guy's favorite naming method. The woman thought for a moment and shook hands with Huaisher. Sophie. She introduced herself. You can call me Sophie Tilton. Huaisher nodded. Is Madame Tilton here for a trip as well? It should be said that I'm worried about my daughter's first trip, so I want to check for her. Her uncle should think so too. The corners of Sophie's mouth curled up slightly, like a smile, looking more and more mysterious. She suddenly asked, Anyway, the journey is long. I wonder if Huaisher is interested in playing a game? Game? Huaisher was puzzled, but it didn't matter after thinking for a while. He had nothing to do anyway. Then, he saw Miss Sophie take out a medium-sized wooden box from a small lady's bag beside her and put it on the table. It was like a chessboard. After slowly opening it, it revealed an exaggerated space that was completely disproportionate to the outside, as well as countless neatly stacked cards. Since the release of the All Ages card, more than 2,000 card packs were all listed here, including more than 1,600 limited edition cards, such as Dazzling Gold, Diamond, and Source Tin. It made Huaisher's Corium Gold Dog eyes stung. He couldn't help but lean back. JPG, where did this peerless tycoon come from? Looking at his shocked face, Miss Sophie smiled mysteriously. How about a round of All Ages card? His words had an inconceivable magical power that made people believe in him and focus on him. People couldn't help but want to agree with her idea. Isn't it just a game of cards? Come on. Then, Huaisher fell into a daze. The moment he nodded, a faint fog engulfed the entire cruise ship, enveloping everything in the framework of the creator. Looking at the young man who was already immersed in the game, Sophie slowly raised her eyes. Mr. Huaisher, as the child's guardian, I won't be as undisciplined and kind-hearted as KP, thinking that as long as you can reach Canberra, you'll pass. She said seriously, unless you can win against me, otherwise, please go home. Chapter 460. As the chessboard continued to unfold, Huaisher opened his eyes again and found himself standing in a vast fog. In front of him was a huge blank chessboard that served as a battlefield. On both sides were the graveyard and the card library, as well as the ocean that represented the abyss below the battlefield. And on the other side of the chessboard, Madame Sophie's figure slowly appeared. Oh my, so rich! Huaisher pretended to suck in a few breaths of cold air. Anyway, there was no cold air for him to breathe in. There wasn't even an air conditioner, but it didn't feel stuffy. It was a limited edition aerial battlefield simulation kit sold by Tomorrow News Gaming Company, Super World Records, aimed at rich players. The miniature framework, meticulously fabricated by the creator, was implanted into the relics created by alchemy, finally creating this real space. Of course, you could find a random place on the ground and draw a few grids, but the top-notch sound and visual effects were F***ing different. Otherwise, how could it highlight the prettiness of a pay-to-win player? In particular, the set in front of Huaisher was simply the best of the best. It had its own projection and mimicry effects, and could perfectly restore the characters and artifacts represented by each card. There was even a bondage voice and full destruction special effect. Marrying a paper person was not a dream. Huaisher tried to throw out his one-of-a-kind commemorative Prince of Paradise card from his bag. In an instant, the projection of a mountain spirit riding a white horse and holding a sword of virtue slowly appeared in the grids in front of him. A crown of light floated above his head, handsome and majestic. How should he put it? Huaisher was quite embarrassed. Actually, he wasn't that handsome, was he? Did he use too much of the beautifying lens? Madame Sophie was quite patient. She waited until Huaishir finished showing off before asking, "Are there any favoritism rules? If you're not familiar with it, you can practice 2 rounds of man-machine mode." "No need." Huaishir waved his hand. "It took me 5 minutes to completely master this game." Madame Sophie's eyebrows seemed to be raised slightly, but she didn't say anything. She nodded. "Then, let's use the standard mode. How about it?" "Okay." Huaishir nodded and sat down on his chair, motioning for her to bring it on. "Today, I'll show you what a godly dog is." He had completely forgotten about his terrible luck of not being in Nigeria. The standard mode was the most common rule in the Myriad Worlds cards. In a 1v1, both sides would choose their own module card packs, then combine them with the common card packs and create their own card packs. They would then roll the dice to decide who would win first and then start the competition. Both sides had 20 HP each, and once the HP was deducted, the other side would win. 2 out of 3 wins. This was the easiest way to learn, and it was also the most technical way to compete. However, most of the time, it depended on the content of the deck prepared by the other party. After all, there were natural restraints between some card packs. For example, the Roman genealogy and the Russian Federation genealogy were both in their later stages. However, the Pantheon Temple, which was upgraded from the Hall of the Pharaoh, was able to suppress the artificial holy spirits of the Russian Federation genealogy with a sea of people. The most common tactic of the Egyptian genealogy was the Giron god. When faced with the Ennead of the American genealogy, it could not bring out the iconic turtle style of play. Green Sun's card pack could completely counter the artifact tactics of the Astronomy Association's card pack, and Golden Dawn, which also liked to use the artifact route like the Astronomy Association, could completely defeat Green Sun's surprise attack strategy. At the same time, most of the Abyss card packs would be targeted by the Astronomy Association. Every card pack had its own strengths and weaknesses, but more often than not, there was a comprehensive score and evaluation. Some card packs dropped from S+ to C after going through the environment. Even if this was not balanced to some extent, this imbalance itself was part of the whole dynamic balance. The Ingzhou genealogy, which jumped to a rating because of the environment, had no reason to be on par with the ranch's main deck, which had been immovable for thousands of years, right? Without taking advantage of Huaishir, Madame Sophie took the lead to choose her card pack, leaving plenty of room for Huaishir to think. The American genealogy, the battle between the North and the South. This category was built around the Civil War between the American Free Cities and the United Nations more than 100 years ago. At that time, it could be said to be the prelude to the American Golden Age. There were many cards with potential that could be arranged in advance at a lower cost. From the middle, they would crazily increase their own lethality, and their ability to protect themselves in the early stage was definitely not bad. She did not underestimate Huaishir and adopt a fast attack strategy. She was very cautious and prepared to go all out. She was determined to shave him bald. After pondering for a moment, Huaishir raised his head and looked at the Starlight card pack classification in front of him, revealing a mysterious smile. Madame Sophie suddenly became alert. She braced herself. She still didn't know Huaishir very well. Those who knew him knew that once he showed such a smile, it meant that he had begun to ask the 3 questions in life. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? There are so many card packs. Which one should I choose? Completely embarrassed to show his cowardice in front of the rich woman, Huaishir, who had only played the basic version of the novice card pack, fell into a dilemma. Then, he began to be stubborn out of habit. He closed his eyes and counted the soldiers. When he opened his eyes, he saw a huge button in the direction his finger was pointing. Randomly selected. Huaishir's smile suddenly stiffened. Oh my God, I'm dead. In an instant, countless Starlight card packs rapidly changed. In the end, accompanied by a hoarse battle cry, a card pack made of ancient leather fell from the sky. 3 overlapping triangles represented the existence of the World Tree. Nordic Pedigree, the outstanding representative of Fast Attack, Berserker, and Mad Dog, the first choice for masters to bully noobs. The typical style of, you cut me, if you can't cut me, I'll cut you to death. When my life points drop below 5 points, you'll be dead. Most of the artifacts had amazing power, but the side effect was to reduce the player's life points. If Valhalla's economy couldn't recover, then it would directly die on the spot. But at this time, he must not be afraid. If he showed an expression of, "What the F asterisk CK should I do?" he would lose half the game before it even started. So, Huaishi's smile became more and more mysterious. Then, looking at the 3 randomly selected identity cards in front of him, he began to stare blankly. Wanderer, Odin. Skill, Wisdom. You can play 1 more rune totem every turn. You could draw 1 more card for every rune totem you lose. Surtur, Skill Dusk, can designate a character card at any time to obtain the weapon card Levantin. Can only be used once. After the character enters the graveyard, Levantin will be exiled and lost forever. Queen of Heaven Freya, Skill Glory. Every round, every time there's a rune totem, can designate a character card on the field to obtain the life points effect. How should he choose? Which one should he choose? Huaishi closed his eyes and continued to choose the cards. Finally, he opened his eyes. Okay, Odin. On the opposite side, Madame Sophie took out Itzum, the leader of the Ennead. Skill. Every blood sacrifice on the field will increase the character card's value. It felt very powerful. Anyway, Huaishi didn't understand how to play this, but he still took the lead to pick up the dice and decided to play first. Take my lucky king's power. Huaishi raised his hand confidently, and then under Madame Sophie's silent gaze. He rolled a 1. How did you do it? JPG Huaishi also wanted to ask himself, how did he get the smallest number out of the 20 dice? Looking at the unconcealable dullness and guilt on the young man's face, Madame Sophie couldn't help but shake her head and sigh. Am I being too cautious? There's no need to care about this kind of newbie, right? She picked up the dice and threw it casually. Then she also rolled a 1. Madame Sophie, Huaishi, in a long silence, the 2 sides looked at each other awkwardly, feeling as if they had met the people from Africa in a foreign country. The originally austere atmosphere also became somewhat cordial in a sense. When the 2 sides had the same number, they had to continue to roll, or the one who rolled first would have the upper hand. Madame Sophie was too lazy to care about this. She waved her hand and signaled Huaishi to play first. Huaishi looked at the pile of cards to his right that he had just searched online and matched on the spot. With a wave of his hand, 7 cards suddenly flew across the air and floated in front of Huaishi. His luck was not bad. 3 rune totems as resources, 1 spell, 1 weapon, and 2 character cards, a high-cost Valkyrie and an iconic Berserker. After swiftly placing down 2 rune totems, Huaishi threw out the Berserker. Instantly, the bare-chested, white-bearded Berserker with scars all over his body walked out of the sweeping cold wind, holding a great sword and roaring at the sky. He didn't know what Huaishi was thinking behind him. Anyway, the Berserker's passive was to lose HP and increase attack. Let him take a beating first. After the end of the round, Madame Sophie swung down a temple and used the spell card to exchange the temple for a high-grade resource card, Cotton Plantation. As an economic building, in addition to the fixed production of resources, every round was equivalent to a blood sacrifice for the Ennead. Immediately afterward, the skinning warrior with the obsidian axe was summoned in advance during the blood sacrifice. After being endowed with the dexterity special effect, he swung the big club inlaid with obsidian fragments and smashed it down on the Berserker's head. In an instant, the Berserker's HP was about to hit bottom, but blood-red flames rose on his body, and his attack power jumped wildly, almost doubling. But then, the skinning warrior's ability gave him a stun effect. He was stopped for 1 round. Oh my god! Huaishi was stunned and felt a chill at the back of his head. He began to wonder if he had been too confident just now. You mean the all-ages card? Also on the cruise ship, Crow was stunned after hearing about ST's test from the DM and KP. As far as she knew, ST was a super collector and enthusiast. Although she didn't know the specific record, she was once a candidate for the annual Hall of Fame selection more than a decade ago because of her outstanding contributions to the revision of the competition system. If she wanted to play the all-ages card with Huaishur, it could be said that Antarctica basically had nothing to do with her. Pack your luggage and go back to Gao Laozhuang. What are you guys doing? Crow is furious. This is not what we agreed on. Even if you want to go back on your word, you don't have to do this, do you? In the silence, KP and the DM suddenly looked at each other strangely. Ahem. KP came out to smooth things over, smiling and waving his hand. Don't worry, although ST's mouth is vicious, she's actually the kindest of the three of us. As long as the players follow her rules, nothing will happen. She has never done things like seeing the ancient god as soon as you enter the door, or using the wishing spell to directly airdrop the adult red dragon on the next table over the newcomer group. As long as Huaishur's level is passable, there's an 80 to 90% chance that nothing will happen. Right? Speaking of this, he was a little unsure. After all, ST was the most serious one among them. Her harshness was second only to the DM. Crow couldn't help but sigh, throwing away the trivial rules of the all-ages card game. In the end, it was nothing more than a game of numbers. With Huaishur's mathematical ability, let alone probability, it was already a miracle that he could calculate his economy and maximum output for each round. What's more, how could she not know how bad Huaishur was? He would never be able to reach the level of god of whipping in this lifetime. If he really went up, let alone winning, it would be ST's mercy if he could last 10 rounds. You guys need to give me an explanation for this. Crow asked solemnly. Are you guys planning to violate the covenant? Or is it that Golden Dawn has given you a higher price so that you're ready to be a traitor? As she spoke, her pupils turned scarlet, and countless black gas overflowed from her feathers, faintly outlining the ferocious outline of a black hole. Wait, don't worry. KP suddenly panicked and hurriedly raised his hand to signal her to calm down. He turned back and glanced at the DM. Hey, say something. Didn't you agree at that time? The old DM's face was as calm as water, and as always, there was no expression on his face. He just shook his head, unable to watch this farce anymore. Do you want to say it, or should I? The DM asked. In silence, the two looked at each other, and finally KP said, Forget it, I'll do this kind of thing that offends her. Anyway, it's not the first time anyway, cough cough, to be honest. KP took a deep breath, and his expression became more and more strange. It was as if he was trying very hard to hold back his laughter, and under professional training, he didn't laugh out loud. She. He turned his head and covered his mouth, his face flushed red. She knows the rules very well, especially likes the all-ages card, and is one of the few collectors in the entire territory. But in fact, since 70 years ago, she has been secretly participating in the border region's qualifiers without us knowing. But until now, she hasn't made it in even once. He finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Although I don't want to say it, but you really don't have to worry about this. KP hammered his knees and laughed until tears almost came out of his eyes. She always thinks that she's super strong, just that her luck isn't too good. But in fact, her ability to play cards is super weak. She can't even beat someone like Lily who just started learning, and she doesn't even let people talk about it. Even the officials don't understand why she's so weak. Last time she couldn't beat someone online, and her mouth was so foul that even her account was banned. I said a few words, and she gave me a look. I can't take it anymore. DM, quickly take a screenshot of her expression at that time. It's too interesting, huh? He's right. DM calmly picked up his teacup and took a sip. He still looked calm and serious, but his trembling fingers betrayed him. It was obvious that he was resisting the urge to laugh wildly, and he was kind enough to not hit his companion when he was down. What the hell? Crow couldn't believe it. Are you kidding me? That's right. KP pulled out a piece of tissue and wiped his tears of laughter. He continued to expose ST's dark secrets. She's been playing for 70 years and has written more than 400 sets of strategies and analysis. But in fact, she can't even beat the simplest man-machine mode. She even smashed several chessboards in anger. In short, he said sternly, This is what it means to be a chicken pecking at each other. On the chessboard, the difficult battle had already entered its final stage. Unknowingly, both of them were already sweating profusely, and steam was rising from their heads. When they looked at each other, their hearts were full of vigilance and fighting spirit. That's right, this was a strong opponent. Huaishir didn't expect that she would be able to match up to the Prince of Fish Pond. She looked like a newbie, but he didn't expect her to be at his level. Amazing. It seemed that he had to show his true ability. My turn, draw a card. Huaishir shouted, and then a devastating golden light illuminated his face. Weapon card, Great Divine Proclamation, Gungnir. A bright and glorious pillar of light descended from the sky and fell on the battlefield, held in the hands of the Valkyrie. Passive effect, banish all the rune totems. Each rune totem increases attack power by 3 points. At the same time, Odin's skill was triggered. Every time a rune totem is lost, a card will be automatically drawn. Huaishir's hand was filled up in an instant. At the same time, after the Valkyrie Brunhilde's 4 turns, the legendary hero Siegelud, who had the most expensive card in the deck, automatically appeared. Huaishir didn't have the Sword of Victory in his hand, but his attack power was still frighteningly high. The most terrible thing was that if the husband and wife were on the battlefield at the same time, their attack power could be stacked. As Gungnir flew out from Brunhilde's hand, Robert Lee, the incarnation of the feathered serpent god Kukulkan, immediately appeared and turned into ashes. With the help of Huaishir's spell card, Siegelud's body was wrapped in a golden light, and he stepped forward and slashed. With the blessing of the husband and wife buff and Siegelud's natural ability to suppress dragons, the ST's Dragon Blood Skinning Templar was cleanly cut in 2. After losing the suppression of the 2, Huaishir laughed, and the berserkers swarmed forward, and they were all killed. Huaishir was stunned. What a pity! Madame Sophie shook her head calmly and hid her trembling fingers behind her back. Not bad. Divine Artifact, Crystal Skull. All the creature cards that entered the graveyard would be regarded as blood sacrifice and be banished forever. Each creature card would bring 1 point of mana. At the same time, every time a blood sacrifice was used, Itsum's skill would give a bonus point to the Leakin Lieutenant General. After Huaishir's berserkers killed all the cannon fodder, the Leakin Lieutenant General's attack and defense had been stacked to a terrifying degree. It could not break through its defense at all. Then in the next round, it easily took away the last 2 points of Huaishir's HP. The outcome was clear. Huaishir was petrified in place, unable to believe what had just happened. Just a little bit more. Sophie finally breathed a sigh of relief. She had almost fallen into the boy's trap. She thought that he was a newbie, but she did not expect that it was all a disguise. If he hadn't subconsciously put up his guard, he would have failed miserably at such an easy task. But when she thought of the card game just now, that kind of long-awaited battle to her heart's content, she couldn't help but be eager to try again. It was hard to find another person who could fight back and forth with him. How about? Sophie took the lead and suggested, let's play again. She decided to give Huaishir another chance. Let this young man have a good taste of what a real master is. Chapter 461. After that, ST never won again. The ship sailed all the way across the ocean, came to America, turned south, and went all the way to Antarctica. After crossing to the Drake Zephyr Belt, there were a total of 91 games. She only won the first game at the beginning. After that, Huaishir, who gradually figured out the trick, began to rise all the way. He skillfully used all kinds of card packs that he had never seen before and pushed ST into the hell of despair again and again. He could be considered an expert in the Silent Crown Saint division. Even if the game genre was not the same, at least he had the foundation of leading people in the past. With ST's help, after passing the novice stage, he immediately began to make a fortune. He won to the extent that he couldn't believe it. Challenge mode, Abyss mode, Epic mode, all the way through, even the highest level of AI difficulty in the chessboard's training mode flew dangerously low. It was unimaginably smooth. Maybe I'm lucky? In the 7th round, Huaishir threw out the last magic card in his hand and accurately beheaded ST's character card. The background music and special effects of the victory suddenly popped up. Madame Sophie, on the other hand, had fallen into deep despair. She sat in her chair with her head down and repeatedly muttered things like, "I can't even beat a novice. They're all playing me. It's not embarrassing to lose to the guardian of the kingdom of heaven," and so on. It was as if she was surrounded by an invisible cold rain and cold wind, looking extremely miserable. Huaishir's expression suddenly became more and more helpless. How about we play another game? If you can hold on for 10 rounds, you win. How about that? Are you insulting me? ST really wanted to scold him, but the all-worlds card was too fun. She gritted her teeth and restrained herself. In the end, she couldn't help but nod. Then this time, she couldn't even hold on for 6 rounds. "I'm not playing anymore. What a broken game. Shitty planning. Cheating me of my money." Madame Sophie angrily pulled out an axe from her pocket, raised her hand, and smashed it on the chessboard in front of her. Huaishir was so scared that he hurriedly stopped her. "Big sis, forget it. Big sis, don't bother with this trash game. How about we just play Silent Crown? Recently, we've increased the drop rate of SSR cards to 5%. I'll take you. How about I carry you to the next level?" On the other side of the cruise ship, KP, who was holding the binoculars, was about to roll off the deck and into the sea from laughter. It was rare to see ST suffer setback. These 2 days, he was collecting new material every minute and every second as if he was celebrating the new year. There were already 3 full memory cards in the camera. "Wow, aren't you 2 companions?" Crow was already stunned. "Why are you trying to harm each other?" KP turned around and looked at her blankly. "Isn't it fun to persecute your companions? I thought you were the kind of person who could understand me." Crow also wanted to say that he was insulting him, but he was too happy when he persecuted his own contractor. The 2 of them looked at each other and high-fived at the same time. "Awesome." After taking another memory card, KP put down the phone in satisfaction. He wiped the tears from his laughter and tried very hard to squeeze out a sympathetic look. I can actually understand her conflicted state of mind. After all, among us, her relationship with Lily is the best. To her, that child is just like her daughter and younger sister. KP lit a cigarette and couldn't help but shake his head. Huaishir is the one who saved Lily with his own hands. He's only here to complete the last step. But to ST, it's like her own family is about to be taken away. You can understand that, right? After raising a child for 15 years, the feeling of opening the door and seeing the original unscrupulous parents standing at the door, although it's a bit different, but it's about the same. KP shrugged. "So, among the 3 of us, I'm the most relaxed, and ST is the most uncomfortable." If possible, she wouldn't have bothered Huaishir. No matter what price she had to pay, she would have completed the last step for Lily. But now, the person who can truly complete Lily's transformation is not herself. She's definitely upset, but no matter how upset she is, she can't vent her anger on Huaishir. After all of this was done by Huaishir, so she's just a little sad. I understand. Crow sighed. It's like coming home and finding out that your own idiot wants to raise pigeons. That kind of upset feeling is really indescribable. Is that true? KP was stunned. No. Crow looked at him with pity. I'm just playing along to show that I understand you. Well, let's continue the original topic. Where were we? Upset, but there's nothing you can do about it. Crow reminded. Yes, upset. KP sighed. So that's why she wants Huaishir to suffer a little, right? But out of her own principles, she can't maliciously set a trap for the player, and she can't deliberately go easy on him. The test she prepares can't be too overboard, but also can't be too difficult. In the end, even if she has to think of a way to make things difficult for him, Crow couldn't help but sigh. Isn't this just like a child throwing a tantrum? Don't you think it's very interesting? KP turned back and asked. Back then, she was the most popular administrator in Heavenly State. Although after the fall of Heavenly State, her personality became very strong. But now, for Lily, she actually gave Huaishir a way out. He, ST, is really the cutest." Crow moved a little to the side in disdain. "I feel that you're a pervert. To tell you the truth, I feel that way too." KP waved his hand, and the cruise ship's trajectory instantly changed. Under the framework of the Creator, the huge cruise ship instantly disappeared. Then, it appeared thousands of miles away, avoiding the huge whirlpool that suddenly appeared on the sea and the slowly rising Spectre ship above the original sea. The Spectre ship that rose from the whirlpool blankly patrolled one round, then quietly disappeared. KP shook his head helplessly. "How many times has this happened?" he asked. "The 8th time, the 9th time? To be honest, I didn't count." Crow whistled. "I'll have to trouble you guys to do your best. It's not that I want to say this, but isn't your contractor too strange?" KP couldn't help but complain. What kind of fate is this? From Indonesia to here, he first met Dagon, who was passing by. When he reached Australia, he was involved in the Black Storm. When he finally reached Canberra, he was only one step away from being involved in Sand King's mess. In the end, after he boarded the ship, he kept on causing trouble. Think about it. The pirates who robbed him with the Egyptian genealogy privateer certificate, the traitor from the American genealogy who originally intended to board the ship, the reflection of the destructive element, Boishuan, the Atlantis that suddenly opened last night, and the Terminator ship that was obviously the lost sourcebook of the Frozen Sea genealogy just now. In the words of the Darknet, there are a total of 10 modules chasing after him. Wherever he goes, trouble will happen. What kind of luck is this? I don't want to either. Life is not easy. Crow sighed. Isn't this the attraction of the Book of Destiny? I tried to change it before, but the more I changed it, the worse it got. The celestial genealogy needs a master. After waiting for so many years, I'm afraid the cultivation value it produces is reaching its limit. As long as Huaishur holds the Book of Destiny, the desire of the celestial genealogy will continuously change his fate. It will make him fall into all kinds of pits like a roller coaster. In the end, he will either become stronger quickly, or he will die quickly. Haven't you thought of other ways? Young Master of Destiny. To be honest, it's not enough. There's no other way. At worst, I'll just change it again. I've already tested it a few times. I'm just waiting for this time when he evolves. Crow rubbed his little wings and said confidently, "When the time comes, I'll transfer all the influence of the Book of Destiny to his luck with love. This way, at least for the next 5 years, the influence of the Book of Destiny won't be too great." KP was stunned. "I feel that doing this will easily lead to an unnatural death." "What do you mean by feeling?" Crow always felt that he was underestimating his silly boy. He couldn't help but refute. "It'll definitely be good. So why are you laughing?" "Because I thought of something happy." Crow glanced at him. "Why are you laughing too?" "I also thought of something happy." Regardless of how the black-hearted woman in his family was causing trouble for his future behind his back, when Huaishur finally brought the ST to the gold level, a high-pitched whistle sounded. They finally arrived at the South Pole. From the suitcase, Huaishur took out the sweater, woolen pants, cotton-padded clothes, and the stumbling crow windbreaker that he specially bought before leaving. He wrapped himself into a ball, carried his backpack, and walked off the boat with difficulty. What greeted him was a cold wind and an endless world of ice and snow. A fat Antarctic bear squatted on an iceberg floating on the surface of the sea in the distance. It lowered its head and ate seals. Its white fur almost merged with the ice and snow. There were no seabirds in the sky at all. Everything in sight was as if the sky was frozen by frost, the white land formed by endless snow and glaciers, black rocks, and dark blue sea water. He couldn't hear any clamor. The world outside the scientific research station was quiet, and the desolate scenery extended to the end of the line of sight. The mountain ghost's sacred mark had already fallen into decline. In this absolute low temperature, even with the vitality of many abyssal plants, it was still difficult to deviate from the original attributes and environment. A deep sense of laziness and sleepiness constantly came from the sacred mark, as if it wanted to pull him to sleep quickly and survive this long winter. But his body was excited in a completely different way. It seemed to be full of vitality. His blood was surging, his muscles were jumping happily, and every step he took was full of vitality. Looking at the endless world of ice and snow in front of him, Huaisher opened his mouth and couldn't help but exhale heavily. He suddenly wanted to pull a sled. Chapter 462. After realizing his strange thoughts, Huaisher immediately sucked in a few breaths of cold air. Fortunately, the air conditioning in Antarctica was sufficient, so no one cared about the increase in global carbon emissions by a few hundred million. They just looked at Huaisher, who was standing on the spot, and more like some kind of creature that liked to tear down homes. He vaguely heard a faint shrill voice coming from afar. Seriously, is this human an idiot? Maybe he's wearing human skin somewhere. A silly voice said, I smell it. He smells like a dog. It's especially like Asa. How is it similar? The shrill voice suddenly argued. Asa is black and white, and his eyes are blue. How is it the same? The honest voice said, That's what I think. What you think, I don't think it's the same at all. The shrill voice said, He doesn't even have hair. How is he as good-looking as Asa? Huaisher turned his head in shock. In a vague trance, he actually saw a Samoyed and a Saint Bernard on a sleigh by the dock, roaring loudly. The dogs were talking? No, it seemed that he could understand what the dogs were saying. Huaisher eavesdropped for a long time, listening to the two of them arguing about the difference between him and Asa. He couldn't help but ask, Who is Asa? Who called me? With a howl, a fat husky covered in thick hair raised his head from a dog bowl as big as a wash basin and looked around blankly. Suddenly, the dogs next to the other sleighs also began to argue. Then, they were kicked by the old man who came over with the goods. Suddenly, they stopped howling and shut up, no longer making any noise. The old man who threw the package on the sleigh had already walked in front of Huaisher. He was so burly. After wrapping himself in a cotton coat, he was like a small mountain. His exposed face had frostbite and scars, and he was exhaling hot breath. His green eyes looked at Huaisher in front of him and nodded. Huaisher? He asked directly. I am. The young man nodded. All right, let's go then. The old man nodded. After showing the certificate of his guide, he pointed to his sleigh and said, It will take half a day to get there, and it might snow. Did you bring all your things? If you don't have one, I can lend you one. Yes. Huaisher nodded and followed, sitting on the sleigh. Then, after the old man whistled, the sled dogs that had eaten their fill began to yell and pull the sled with all their might. Huaisher was extremely envious. He really wanted to go down and give them a hand or two. After being freed from the heavy pressure of fate for a short period of time, there will indeed be a state of excessive vitality, but this is just an illusion. It's very cold here. You need to conserve your energy. The old man took out a bottle of wine from under his feet and threw one to Huaisher. You still have a long way to go. Huaisher took it, not quite understanding it. He felt that something was wrong, but he could not tell what it was. Noticing that he was at a loss, the old man took a sip of the wine and snapped his fingers. It was as if layers of fog were dispelled in an instant, and the points that were deliberately blocked and hidden in his memory and consciousness were reopened in an instant. It was as if a bolt of lightning had passed through his spinal cord. Huaisher trembled for a moment and suddenly realized what had happened. He recalled the actions of KP's sister, and when he thought of how that bastard had acted in front of him again and again, he could not help but gnash his teeth in hatred. When he thought of Madame Sophie, he also felt a sense of strangeness. Perhaps she and KP were the same kind of existence. And the old man in front of him, You can call me DM, the old man said calmly. I am their companion, and I have come for you, Huaisher. Why? Huaisher was at a loss. Because next, you will accept a trial left behind by the Utopia, DM said. According to convention, we, the three creators known as the Three Wise Men, need to consider you and determine whether you are qualified to accept the trial. Only then can you be recognized as an official member of the Utopia. Huaisher took a long time to react. Is this a trial of the Utopia? The trial has not begun yet, Huaisher, DM said. Your trial will not be so simple. Even so, you don't have to be too pressured because there is no standard answer to this trial until now, and the results that everyone desires are not the same. Besides, the utopia no longer exists, so you can just take it as a process. Huaisher was at a loss. In fact, his head was wrapped in the hat, and he could not touch it. Facing the cold wind and the howling of the sled dogs, Huaisher thought for a long time and finally understood. In other words, KP and Madame Sophie are testing me? More or less. DM nodded. KP made a bet with someone. He bet $10 that you can't cross Australia safely. ST's requirement is that you have to win a game of world peace from her. Why sure, they're all people who think highly of you. They will not deliberately make things difficult for you, nor will they set up obstacles that you can't pass. Hearing this, Huaisher could not help but look back at him. I think you will tell me next that you are different. Your requirements will be particularly strict. Yes. DM nodded. As you guessed, my requirements are very strict. It should be said that I am the most demanding of the three of us. Then, Huaisher hesitated for a long time before he finally mustered the courage to ask, "What are the requirements?" "Don't worry," DM said. "You have passed." Huaisher was in disbelief. "I passed." He suspected that he had heard wrongly. "When? Did I do something again?" "From the beginning and what I asked, you've been doing, haven't you?" DM held the reins of the sleigh and calmly drove the galloping sleigh, leading Huaisher step by step into the vast white and dark world in front of him. "I'm different from KP. As long as KP finds it interesting, there is no need to delve into the means. I am different from Saint ST will think that the result is the most important, and the process does not need to be concerned." In the gradually sharpening cold wind, DM's voice came. "But what I'm looking for is not an interesting plot or the final result. What I prefer to see is the methods the players take and the rough life they have gone through. What I want to see is an adventurer, not a superficial thing that goes into the dungeon just for money, but a person who embarks on the road of destiny with dreams, ideals, ambitions, and even hatred or pain." He said, "The adventurer I want is a person who will not bow to reality. As long as you have such qualifications, I will not obstruct you. Why sure, you don't have to worry that I will be as bad as KP, although in many cases, I am more unreasonable than him. Since you fulfill my conditions, I won't stop you. So, you can take advantage of this opportunity to have a good rest, adapt to the environment here, restore your spirit, and then start to prepare for the trial you will face." Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He could not help but raise his hand to rub his face that was numb from the cold and felt a faint pain. But for some reason, he felt the corners of his mouth curl up. He was smiling. He felt a faint joy in his heart. It was as if he was extremely proud of DM's evaluation. It made him somewhat unable to react. "In your opinion, am I an adventurer?" He pointed at himself with some doubt. "Or, as long as I'm stubborn and reckless, it will be fine? If you want to say it, I have a slight complaint about your reckless style, but this kind of thing can't be forced." DM shrugged calmly. "However, I think you may have misunderstood something. Why sure, adventure is not a narrow thing limited to desperate situations. It can exist in everyone's life. The only way to open it is courage. It is a turning point that changes everything. But its essence and source comes from the noble dream of not being ordinary and not being willing to fall into the dust. No matter whether this dream is noble or despicable, big or small, good or bad." He turned back and said to Huaisher seriously, "After all, the dream is the most precious, isn't it?" Huaisher was speechless for a long time and sighed awkwardly. "But in fact, I don't even have a dream. I've been looking all the way until now and still haven't found it. I don't even have a clue about the direction of employment." In this regard, DM was unusually tolerant and only said, "Adventure is something that lasts a lifetime. Just a moment of confusion doesn't mean anything, does it? What if I can't find it in the future?" Huaisher asked. "Then I'll keep looking." DM asked as if it was a matter of course. "It's just waiting and searching. It's not painful, is it? You may be searching for your whole life and end up with nothing. You may soon find that there are things in this world that are worth you investing your whole life to accomplish. Or maybe you'll be lucky and find something worth sacrificing for and die generously. Or even more cruelly, you may find that you've lost a lot of dreams and opportunities before you die, and you don't realize it." He paused and said seriously, "But no matter what, I can be sure that your adventure and search will not be in vain. Everything you've given will be repaid in that moment. No matter how bitter the fruit is, it's better than tasteless water. Even if it's unwillingness and regret, it's better than living a mediocre life." Then there was a long silence. There was only the deep echo of the distant wind and snow, and the disorderly, off-key singing of the sled dogs. Gradually, the singing disappeared. At some point, Huaisher finally fell asleep in the cold wind. After a long time, he opened his eyes and let out a long breath. He felt as if his whole body was lighter, and his mood was calm and calm. He didn't fall into a beautiful dream, nor was he haunted by nightmares. He just fell asleep, and when he woke up with a full stomach, he felt a heartfelt peace. Even if it wasn't a new life, he felt a sense of peace and was no longer afraid. The sled had stopped for a long time. Several sled dogs were still arguing about the outcome of the speed competition, and on the bonfire next to them, the stewing food in the pot emitted a tempting aroma. "You're awake? Come and eat." DM reached out to greet him. "After eating, your adventure will start again, Huaisher." "Okay." Huaisher lifted the blanket on his body, walked forward, and ate a hearty meal. Then he wiped his mouth, picked up his backpack, and prepared to embark on the last leg of his journey. "Is there anything I need to pay attention to in the next trial?" Before leaving, Huaisher asked. "Just do it the way you like. Don't worry, and don't be afraid. It's not a big deal." Other than that, Huaisher asked, "Is there anything else you can tell me?" The old man next to the bonfire was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking. After a long time, he whispered to him, "You have to pursue Huaisher. Don't slack off in your life." He said, "Don't give up on your own life." The old man's expression was so serious and solemn, as if the life of the young man in front of him was a precious treasure. He was full of expectations and blessings for his future. He hoped that he could continue to walk on his own adventure unyieldingly. "I will." Huaisher smiled from the bottom of her heart. "Goodbye." "Okay." The old man nodded. "Goodbye." Then Huaisher turned around, held up his hiking stick, and walked step by step toward the southernmost part of the world. After taking a few steps, he looked back and saw a gust of wind rising from the flat ground. The wind and snow flew up and fell. The bonfire, the old man, and the sleigh had disappeared without a trace. And at some point, the black authorization card from the amusement park had appeared in Huaisher's hand. It was glowing with a faint light, echoing the behemoth sleeping in the darkness. Then a fierce wind came whistling from the end of the world, and in an instant, he was swallowed by it. When the wind and snow gradually stopped, Huaisher put down the arm in front of him. He saw the huge building that had appeared in front of him at some point, and the heavy gate that was slowly opening toward him. Behind the gate, he didn't know what was waiting for him in the darkness. Huaisher took a deep breath and slowly walked in. A line of light green fluorescent light lit up on the old screen. Celestial genealogy, stigmata reaction detected. Authorization verification completed. Default sequence program activated. Wanxiang Heavenly Sphere begins operation. Countdown 10, 9, 8, 7, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the new world. Huaisher lay on the bed, feeling dizzy. After eating the noodles, he fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the next day. When he opened his eyes, his first reaction was, "It's over. My job is gone." Secondly, there seemed to be something wrong with this workplace. Why did he hear such a strange sound last night? It sounded like someone was moaning and panting. He was stunned for a long time. Then it dawned on him, is there a gym below? "You're awake?" When the door opened, the man called Xiao Lu from yesterday leaned against the door and looked at him. "You're so thin. How pitiful. Someone's here to pick you up." As he spoke, he winked and winked at Huaisher. "She's a very beautiful young lady." Huaisher's heart sank. It's over. Outside the door, the girl in the wheelchair put down her book and looked over indifferently. "So, you don't want my mother's help?" You want to be self-reliant. Are you here to be a gigolo? Xiao Qing, let me explain. It's okay. I understand. The girl nodded knowingly. There are always people who can't resist the temptation of getting rich overnight and choose the wrong path. I heard that the Heiress Ball Delight service is quite famous. I hope you'll work harder in the future. Don't. I'm innocent. Huaisher tried to explain. It's all Lao Yang's fault. AI Qing didn't dwell on this for long. She already knew what was going on. Naturally, she didn't think that Huaisher came out to sell his body. He really didn't have the guts to do that. Okay, let's go. She patted the armrest of the wheelchair. My mother is still waiting in the car outside. As a result, Huaisher's headache became more and more. Ever since Huaisher's parents fled and went missing for money, it had always been his teacher, Mrs. AI, and her family who constantly provided help for Huaisher. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived to this day. Mrs. AI wanted to adopt Huaisher, but Huaisher couldn't stand living like a burden. He always wanted to find a way to make a living. This time, in order to make some money, he accidentally ran to a gigolo club. Mrs. AI probably wouldn't allow him to work for her in the future. Huaisher walked out of the door with his cello dejectedly. When he saw the gentle face behind the rolled-down window, he couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't know why, but his eyes suddenly turned red. What's wrong? Mrs. AI couldn't help but shake her head and sigh. Are you afraid that I'll scold you? No. I don't know why, but I'm suddenly very happy. Huaisher rubbed his eyes hard. It's good to see you again. If you say more nice things, I won't let you be so wild in the future. Do you understand? AI Ting's expression became serious. Starting tomorrow, come to my house to prepare for the exam. Didn't you want to go to Vienna? You can talk about it after you pass the exam. Okay. This time, Huaisher didn't resist his teacher's arrangement. He nodded and promised. For some reason, he didn't have any resistance or meaningless self-esteem anymore. Even the way AI Qing snorted next to him looked a lot cuter. He lay in the back seat of the car and closed his eyes. Suddenly, he felt that this kind of life wasn't bad. After that, Huaisher lived in Mrs. AI's house with peace of mind. Mrs. AI's husband, Mr. Een, was a very cultured person. He didn't discriminate against Huaisher, who lived in his house. Although he still kept a distance, he didn't hesitate to help him. However, in Huaisher's opinion, this uncle didn't seem to have his own opinions. He basically listened to his wife's arrangements. The Huai family and the Een family were old friends. A few years ago, before Huaisher's family was ruined, he went with his grandfather to attend the funeral of the old master of the Een family. Although the relationship between Huaisher's parents faded, they still got along very well. Otherwise, Huaisher wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet Mrs. AI. The only person who could make him feel the vicious beating of society from time to time was his senior sister, AI Qing. As the daughter of a genius cellist, AI Qing not only inherited her mother's musical talent, but also vaguely surpassed her. In all the cello competitions from childhood to adulthood, Huaisher was always suppressed by her in second place. He simply couldn't breathe. Later, she simply listened to her mother's advice and switched to piano. It had only been more than 4 years, but the room at home where she had trophies and certificates was already full. Xiao Qing's unreasonable talent is incomparable to ordinary people. Even her teacher would often experience setbacks. When AI Ting Sensei talked about these things, she would skillfully ruffle Huaisher's hair. On the other hand, a student like you with just the right amount of talent will make me feel a sense of accomplishment. Why don't you be my son? How about that? We're about the same age. Here it comes again. At this point, Huaisher could only laugh awkwardly. However, the teacher was just saying it. She didn't mean to force Huaisher. Instead, she changed the topic and talked about a female classmate who had recently been very close to Huaisher in school. I heard from Lil Qing that her name is Fu Yi. She mischievously poked Huaisher's arm with her finger. Her father is the deputy chief of the police station. You have to be careful not to get caught. It's not that I don't have one. Huaisher widened his eyes. We're innocent. Last week, I saw you eating with her outside. That's because we were studying, but you were playing with your phones. Little Qing saw it all. The teacher lowered her voice and then pinched his face hard. Be careful. Don't become the kind of scum who plays with feelings. That's the only thing I have expectations for you. Fleischer didn't know how to explain that they were just playing games, but he felt that the more he explained, the more chaotic it would be. He could only shut up and listen to the teacher criticize his attitude of muddling through life. Then, he began to prepare for the professional exam. Last time, when he performed at the school anniversary celebration, there was an internationally famous musician who was invited to watch Fleischer's performance and admired him very much. After knowing that Liu Zhou was the student of the famous cellist Ai Ting, although he gave up on taking Liu Zhou as a disciple, he was still willing to write a letter of recommendation for Liu Zhou to study in Vienna. He also suggested that Liu Zhou get more certificates and resumes before that. This way, his teacher in Vienna could apply for a full scholarship and tuition fee reduction for him. This way, he could save a lot of money. Most importantly, with the joint recommendation from him and his teacher, Fleischer could finally officially find an opportunity to debut in the classical music industry. During this period of time, he had been preparing to sprint and see if he could get both the beginner and intermediate professional certificates. Although life was extremely busy, he gradually felt fulfilled and happy. When he was preparing to go to Jinling for the exam, he received a call from Lao Yang. After so many years of busy work, he finally saved enough money. He even mortgaged his house for a large sum of money and was ready to take his wife to Rome for treatment. Apparently, the recovery rate was 100%. This was delightful. Fleischer answered the phone and stood in front of the exam room for a long time. It wasn't until Ai Ching nudged him that he realized what had happened. What's wrong? She asked. Are you not feeling well? No, I just suddenly feel like life is so beautiful, like a dream. Fleischer chuckled softly. After the exam, you can say if it's a dream or not. Maybe it's a nightmare. Ai Ching shook her head and said, Don't worry. If you have any doubts, I'll definitely wake you up. Then I'll have to trouble you. Fleischer picked up the piano case and walked into the exam room. Fleischer, male, 17 years old, student. Liu Zhou introduced himself. He ushered in the final stage of his happy life. The exam began. While Fleischer was ushering in his happy life in the new world, Golden Dawn had a lot to say. The moment Fleischer walked into the test area, all the permissions left by Golden Dawn were ejected. The entire huge facility that existed in the present realm lost its response, as if it had never existed in the first place. It disappeared from the connection of the land of dreams. All Golden Dawn's permissions were cut off. When Mathers received the news, he was stunned on the spot. His eyebrows raised into a strange arc on his old face. What are you doing? He was instinctively furious and glared at the original person in charge. Last time, I ordered you repeatedly. Did you use the New World server to download pornographic films from the present realm again? It's not that I didn't. The person in charge shook his head in grief and indignation. We now buy pornographic films through Green Sun's smuggling channel. Besides, there are still many things that haven't been settled after the outage last time. I just rewrote the docking program and haven't had time to solve it yet. In the end, such a big thing suddenly disappeared. There's nothing I can do. Even though the person in charge repeatedly assured him, Mathers was still skeptical. This was not the first time these guys had used the Vientiane Heavenly Sphere or the New Worlds program to do pornography. Not only did they use a huge present realm simulation program as VR, but they even used it to do such unethical things. It was embarrassing. Looks like we have to strengthen the construction of spiritual civilization. Mathers rubbed his chin for a long time. This kind of thing should be left to Yeji. Where's Yeji? Where'd he go? Everyone shook their heads in confusion. Obviously, this guy had skipped work again. He's F*King skipping work again? Mathers was furious. A sense of grief and indignation that Golden Dawn was about to come to an end rose in his heart. This guy has already written 100,000 confession poems. What's the use of that? He's skipping work every day, skipping work every day. How embarrassing. I think he'll be hung to death on that old crooked tree outside the Astronomy Association sooner or later. Obviously, it was useless to curse at this time. The problem had to be solved. Moreover, it involved the Vientiane heavenly sphere. It had to be dealt with as soon as possible. Before the utopia split, the Vientiane heavenly sphere was connected to 16 super-large computing centers. It was even known as the present realm simulator. It was convenient for them to simulate and verify the special situation of the present realm at any time. Later, after the Kingdom of Heaven was built, the supporting centers of the Vientiane heavenly sphere were dismantled. Then, the core structure was used in the New World program. It aimed to create a world that could make people feel happy and perfect. It was also used to test new members. Once they entered, the New World program would mobilize the Vientiane heavenly sphere's ability to evolve and create a real world. It would create a world that even the testees themselves had not noticed and desired. When the time came, the stability of the entire world would be evaluated. It would be easy to filter out those who truly desired to make the present realm better. From the masses, they would find those pioneers who were willing to sacrifice everything for their utopia. Although Golden Dawn had collectively joined the Abyss due to the split and fall of the utopia, they still did not give up on this precious asset. On the contrary, this had become one of the channels for Golden Dawn to recruit new members and screen them. This was especially true for those with high potential who were valued. One had to know that under the simulation of the Vientiane heavenly sphere, the entire world could be said to be completely real. It could almost be used as a reference for the present realm. Everything the testees experienced in it was a reflection of the beautiful world in their own hearts. It could be said that there were no concealments or lies. As long as Golden Dawn used their authority to interfere, they would definitely be able to affect the testees. Even if they did not use lies and deceit to deceive the testees, it was still highly contagious. There might be 100,000 truths in this world, and each of them might be true and credible. There might even be 100,000 truths, and each of them was effective and feasible. Golden Dawn was not afraid of the refutations and objections of others. They were more willing to show people everything they pursued and the world they wanted. Perhaps it was because of this fanatical pursuit of truth and the utopia that they were qualified to be called the elements of destruction. What they sought was indeed a beautiful new world, but it would lead everything into the abyss. Everyone would instinctively abandon ugliness. However, no one would resist the pursuit of beauty in their nature. When this pursuit evolved into fanaticism, it was not far from falling into the abyss. Even the utopia could not avoid its own ending, let alone those who came to accept the trial. Over the years, Golden Dawn had generously spread this invitation from the abyss in the abyss. Every time a sublimator obtained an authority card, the huge gravitational force from Golden Dawn would slowly penetrate and manifest. Through various coincidences, they would go to a fixed location and enter this new world. Now that the Vientiane heavenly sphere had suddenly fallen silent, it immediately gave Marth a headache. One had to know that in addition to the New World program, the Vientiane heavenly sphere had many other functions as a recording and control engine. These days, they could not show their faces in the present realm. If it really crashed, who knew how much it would cost to recover this loss? I'll go in and take a look myself. After hesitating for a moment, he decided to project his spirit body and enter to repair it. Soon, a helmet connected to dozens of cables was delivered to him. He raised the helmet, put it on, and closed his eyes. The will of nothingness was given a temporary shell. In an instant, it followed the fluctuations of the abyss tide and quickly rose. It kept jumping between the various frames that served as signal stations and finally entered the Vientiane heavenly sphere. He's here, he's here. Before he could stand still, he heard a surprised voice. The damn otaku of Golden Dawn is here. Hurry up and hold my hand. Let me see if you're developing properly. Before he could react, 3 silhouettes appeared in front of him. An old man, a mysterious woman, and a young man with a strange smile reached out to Marth in unison. The 3 frames instantly enveloped him. Marth subconsciously wanted a counterattack, but his expression suddenly changed. An illusory figure suddenly appeared behind him, holding a short sword and stabbing it into his back. The sharp blade pierced through his chest, causing him to freeze on the spot. Again, in that instant of impact, what Marth felt was not anger or fear, but an indescribable confusion. Why am I being stabbed in the back again? Why is it me again? Then he realized that it was the three wise men. Has the dark net at the border given up on neutrality and sided with the Astronomy Society? Don't worry, this isn't a war between the Astronomy Society. The voice behind him laughed softly. At best, it's just a continuation of the Republic's civil war. The unfair battle of 3 against 1 officially began at this moment. Huaisher woke up from his dream and vaguely heard screams coming from afar. But listening carefully, it sounded like an illusion. A dog barking? He turned over in confusion and continued to sleep. If there was a dream, he should not wake up. He was still having a headache about how to confess to his teacher tomorrow, about him preparing to give up playing the cello. Chapter 464. Is that so? Unexpectedly, the teacher was not as angry as he had imagined. After hearing Huaisher's plan, he was first puzzled, then stunned, and finally very calmly expressed his understanding. He didn't feel any unhappiness or anger at the fact that his efforts had gone down the drain. Instead, it was Huaisher who was stunned. "What's wrong? You look incredulous," the teacher asked. "Although I think this decision is a bit abrupt and irrational, I can also imagine how much courage you need to talk to me about these things. I won't get angry at you without even listening to the end." "Teacher, I'm sorry." Huaisher lowered his head. "It's true that you were a bit angry, but I can also understand your thoughts." Ai Ting picked up the teacup and took a sip. After a long silence, she sighed softly. Even if art itself has a great attraction, after all, it can't be compared to those more intuitive and heavier things. Why, sure, art is floating in the clouds, but there will always be people who can't adapt to the floating life and will choose to step on the ground more realistically. From your words, I can feel your thoughts and determination. After all, you have put the most effort in these years. No matter how angry I am now, the one who has to face this pain is you. You have made a decision. As a teacher, although I am helpless, I can only agree. She paused and suddenly asked, "But as your elder, I have to ask again, why sure, have you really thought it through? Give up the cello. Give up your efforts and bright future since childhood, and even this destined glorious future, to choose another field that you don't understand. You don't even know where you will set foot. The future is uncertain. Face the world alone. Have you really thought it through?" "I haven't thought about it, but I want to make the decision." Huaisher nodded seriously. Ai Ting asked again, "Is there no room for change?" "To be honest, I think I will most likely regret it in the future." Huaisher sighed. "But if I play the cello for the rest of my life, I think I will definitely regret it in the future, right?" "Teacher, it's hard for me to walk down both paths with a clear conscience. If it was in the past, if I knew that I could walk into Vienna and the Golden Hall openly in the future, I would be so happy that I would laugh in my dreams. But now I don't know why, when I dream of something else, something that has nothing to do with the cello." After a long silence, the teenager looked up and stared at the teacher in front of him. "After waking up, I ask myself why I can't feel satisfied, but I can't find the answer. Teacher, if you think I'm just whimsical and boring, then I'll throw these boring thoughts aside and never think about those messy things for the rest of my life. If you feel that my decision is reasonable, then I will feel much more at ease." Ting fell into silence. She did not say anything else. After a long time, she slowly shook her head. "As your teacher, I don't know how to answer your question." "Why sure, you know that aside from some achievements in music, I have no other good points. I can't give you any advice. You have to decide for yourself." Then, as a mother, teacher, after a long silence, Huaisher suddenly raised his head and stared at the woman in front of him. He looked into her eyes and said, "In my heart, you are my mother. I know it's shameless to say this, but other than you, I don't know who else to talk to." Ai Ting was stunned. She stared blankly at the teenager in front of her until he lowered his head in defeat. Then, she could not help but laugh. She could not help but reach out and pinch his face. After so many years, why sure, I never thought that I would be able to hear you call me that one day. To be honest, it makes me happy and sad at the same time. She felt gratified by the teenager's respect. She could do nothing about his rebellion. As your teacher, I can't give you an answer. If I were your mother, I wouldn't be able to answer this question of yours either. AI Ting shook her head slowly, but she could not help but hug Huai Shi tightly. But as a mother, how can I not support my child's decision? She said, no matter what decision you make, I will give you my blessing, Huai Shi. Even if we are not related by blood, you are already my family. You are no different from Xiao Qing. Stunned, Huai Shi closed his eyes and reached out to hug her gently. He could not help but feel like crying. Thank you. He rubbed his eyes. Huai Shi had made his decision. In the end, the person who was the angriest was not the teacher, but Huai Shi's senior sister, AI Qing. After Huai Shi told her that he had decided to give up the cello, she did not speak to Huai Shi anymore. Every morning and evening when they met, she treated Huai Shi as if he did not exist. In this regard, the teacher was helpless and said that this was his own fault, so he had to take the blame himself. The school teachers were also in disbelief, especially when Huai Shi, who had a bright future, suddenly abandoned the cello and came back to make up for cultural studies in the second half of the third year of high school. It was even more difficult to understand. To put it bluntly, they looked at this child as if they were looking at an idiot. What was he thinking? Huai Shi didn't know what the F***CK she was thinking. But what was done could not be undone. Well, although it was not done yet, he was not ready to turn back. Enduring his headache, he opened the cultural books that he had delayed for a long time. He suppressed his thoughts and prepared to face the mountain of books and the sea of questions. Half a year of hard work, so much time. Of course, he did not do well. He barely made it to the second tier. It was a world of difference from his original ending. On the day of the results, Huai Shi was not surprised. He felt pity for him. If you had played the cello honestly, you would have been in Vienna by now. In the milk tea shop, the girl blew on the air conditioner and could not help but shake her head helplessly. How is it? Do you regret it? Why do I feel that you feel worse than me? Huai Shi sipped the milk tea and looked up at her. No. Why do I feel that you are particularly gloating? I am your good brother. Why do you think of me like that? He stared at him with her eyes wide open, her face full of grief and anger. But when she blinked her big eyes, she looked very cute, and there was no way to suspect that she had any dark thoughts. She began to act cute habitually, trying to get away with it. Forget it. Huai Shi shook his head and sighed. But I really think that it is good that you don't go to Vienna. He said softly. The mountains are high and the road is long. You are still so young. What if you are caught in the red light district and do not have a good brother to bail you out? The red light district is a legitimate business there. Thank you. Huai Shi rolled his eyes and then realized that he was being led into a trap by her again. When did I say that I was going to the red light district? I'm worried about you. He grinned and changed the topic. Where do you want to go? This score. How about Jinling? How about Jinling University of Science and Technology? What about your major? I thought about it. Metallurgy. How about that? Huai Shi said. He was stunned for a long time, and she scratched her head. From cello to metallurgy. Isn't the jump a bit too big? What are you thinking? Nothing. I don't know what to do anyway, so I might as well study something that interests me. Okay. He pulled out a long tune and did not say anything else. But before they left, she suddenly gave him a gentle hug. Huai Shi was going to Jinling, and she did not know when she would see him again, so she could not help but feel sad. Huai Shi did not mind. Under Deputy Director Fu's fierce gaze, he sent her to the car and turned around to go home. The next few days were boring. She applied, waited for the notification, and then began her preparations. Not long after, AI Qing set off for Vienna. However, the teacher stayed behind and sent Huai Shi to Jinling University. Because of this, AI Qing's resentment towards Huai Shi grew stronger. As Huai Shi's guardian, she fulfilled all the obligations of an elder and even left 50,000 yuan for Huai Shi. You call me mother, Can I give you some money? AI Ting smiled and looked at him. If you don't want it, I won't give you any more. You can make money however you want, but you can keep this money. After he finished speaking, he drove away without giving Huaishir a chance to regret her decision. Huaishir was left standing at the school gate alone. He stared at his elder with complicated feelings. He wanted to say something several times, but in the end, he did not have the chance to catch up. There was nothing he could say. She had done her best to send Huaishir on the path he chose. Next, he would have to face his university life. He chose it himself. There was no room for regret. Therefore, he had to muster up his courage. He took a deep breath, turned around, and walked into the school gate, ready to welcome the rest of his life. Then he saw a person leaning against the flower bed and smoking. That's why I said that university is good. No one cares if you're a good student or not. The girl named Fu Yi sat on her suitcase and looked at his stunned face. What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost. Huaishir was speechless. To be honest, I didn't do very well in the exam either. Fu Yi tilted her head and smiled. I didn't perform well. I can only be your companion. Huaishir was stunned for a long time, then suddenly laughed. Okay, you are my good friend. Change the word. Fu Yi waved her hand and raised her eyebrows. I don't like this kind of dress anymore. Not far away, in the freshman payment hall, Deputy Director Fu angrily poked his head out and stared fiercely at the little vixen who kidnapped his daughter. Therefore, Huaishir could only smile awkwardly and look at the sky innocently. He prayed that he would not be killed on the spot. Chapter 465. President, this month's application. President, the basketball team submitted the budget application. President, do you want to have a meal together? Huaishir froze for a moment and shook his head. He waved to the eager girl next to him and pointed to the front. Someone is waiting for me. The girl glanced at the well-dressed student union secretary not far away. She nodded and retreated. What's wrong? Fu Yi leaned against the door and looked at the freshman's back. She smiled and said, Am I bothering you? Don't say that. It's just adolescent restlessness. I won't take it seriously. Huaishir shook his head and took out the key to open the office the student union gave him. He didn't need to ask her to come in. She skillfully found her usual seat and began to make tea. One for one, she drank. Huaishir watched. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Huaishir had become the president of the student council, enjoying the taste of power and trouble. Fu Yi, on the other hand, was the mastermind behind the scenes who pushed him to show himself in public. She was hiding behind him, happily slacking off. As an assistant, there was no one more competent than her. However, she seemed to be limited to the scope of an assistant and didn't intend to go further. Like a tiger in the mountains who had found its prey, she drew a circle around the trembling little fox. She didn't intend to eat. She just lay there and looked at it when she had nothing to do. Sometimes Huaishir was a little confused. What was the relationship between the two of them? Sometimes he would ask Fu Yi seriously, and Fu Yi would ask back with a smile. What do you think? Huaishir couldn't say anything. He couldn't guarantee anything. He looked around the office he had only been in for a year. After packing up his few personal belongings, he sat on the chair and couldn't help but feel emotional. You decided? Fu Yi propped up her chin and looked at his side profile. You're really going to apply for early graduation? Yes. I've already finished my professional courses. After thinking about it, I'm afraid I'll just kill time in school. Huaishir replied, It's better to try to face society first. Professor Liu is so old-fashioned. How could he agree? Originally, he wanted me to take the postgraduate entrance exam and send me to Jinling University. After I graduate, I might be able to work in a state-owned enterprise, but I rejected him. Huaishir shook his head. I feel like it's too troublesome. Moreover, I don't think I'm cut out for the job. Besides, I've already found a place to go. Oh, the company you discussed with Senior Chu a few days ago. Fu Yi raised her eyebrows. You're ready to start work? So soon? Yes, I've just received the patent. After thinking about it, it's better to do it sooner rather than later. Huaishir took out 2 documents from the box, waved them in front of Fu Yi, and smiled proudly. Perhaps he really did have a little talent in metallurgy. When he was in his second year of university, he had already started his self-study. Later on, he found some inspiration and ideas from the messy and unconstrained trivial formulas in his dreams. Even if it wasn't a major achievement, it was still something to be proud of. If it wasn't for this, he wouldn't have been favored and invested in by the second generation of the Chu family. Fu Yi's smile became gloating. Speaking of which, people say that you're trying to please his sister and become the son-in-law of the Chu family. I remember that girl is still in high school. Don't make a mistake. I've only met her twice. She's a singer, okay? I only asked for an autograph. Huai Shi sighed. I haven't even entered society yet, and some people are already dirty. You don't believe this nonsense, right? Fu Yi shrugged. It depends on how you explain it. Huai Shi, don't need to explain my actions to other people. Huai Shi actually want to say this. He didn't know why he needed to explain it to Fu, but in the end, he didn't have the courage to say it out loud. He could only take out a document from his backpack and throw it over. What's this? The company's share subscription agreement. Huai Shi shrugged. First young Master Chu is mainly paying for it and takes 60%. I'm using my skills to invest, so I'll take 30%. Isn't this because I want everyone to have a share? Besides, you introduced us to each other, so I'll leave 10% for you. Hurry up and ask your father to fork out more money. With the Chu family's connections, it's difficult to lose money. No need. Fu Yi signed quickly. It's only 4 million. I'll pay for it myself. Huai Shi was stunned. He didn't expect that the secretary who accompanied him day and night was actually a rich woman. Is your father really corrupt? What are you thinking? Fu Yi rolled her eyes at him. My mother gave it to him. Huai Shi then remembered that Fu Yi had a world-famous scholar mother. Indeed, she had many patents in her hands. If she left out a single one, it would be more than that. I've given you all my New Year's money in the past few years. If I lose money, I'll lose my dowry. Fu Yi threw the document over. What else? Take out the other one. Huai Shi shook his head. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. With a sigh, he took out another document from his backpack. It was an employment agreement. The new company still lacks a business partner. Is this considered nepotism? Fu Yi glanced at him with a half-smile. No, I just feel that since you have shares, I don't even have to pay you a salary. Huai Shi picked up his backpack and ruffled her hair roughly. I'll go take a look at the venue that young Master Chu contacted first. Remember to report early after the new year. Goodbye. Goodbye. Fu Yi smiled and nodded. She heard the sound of the door closing behind her. After a long time, she couldn't help but sigh softly. At the age of 25, Huai Shi achieved financial freedom. This day came earlier than expected, thanks to the messy inspiration that constantly appeared in his dreams, as well as young Master Chu's money-burning tactics. 6 months ago, they finally completed the technical breakthrough and developed a new type of single crystal alloy that could be applied to ship wheels. After the patent application was completed, he finally entered the stage of life that most people dreamed of, lying down and counting money. Even though he only had 4% of his shares left after years of continuous investment, how could the size of his shares have increased tenfold? Even 4% was enough for him to live a luxurious life until he died. In fact, this technology still had room for further improvement. It could even be used in key parts of nuclear power plants. However, in order to avoid becoming a protected animal under layers of supervision, Huai Shi was content to stop in the civilian field. As for the extra useless records, they were all thrown to first young Master Chu for him to deal with as he pleased. After young Master Chu found someone to look at the records, the way he looked at Huai Shi changed. After asking a few times and learning that Huai Shi had no intention of going further, he considerately stopped pestering him. The entire company held a celebration party. Even the cleaning lady received a huge red packet. Everyone drank themselves to death in the joy of the harvest. When he opened his eyes in the back seat of Fu Yi's car, he found that he was already downstairs. Thank you, I drank a little too much this time. Huai Shi rubbed his eyebrows and got up groggily. After getting out of the car, he took 2 breaths of cold air and vomited all over the floor. Fu Yi handed over a bottle of hot tea from the convenience store and suddenly asked, When are you planning to leave? HM? Huaishir was taken aback for a moment before realization dawned on her. First young Master Chu told you everything? He kept it a secret for you. I asked him myself. Fu, he shook her head. You wanted to leave half a year ago, right? If it weren't for the completion of this project, I'm afraid you would have resigned long ago. Where are you going next? Self-employment? Nope. Huaishir shook his head and was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he said, I've saved enough money. I want to go out and have a look. Travel around the world? That's fine. It'll be done in 2 or 3 years. You can start over after you come back. No, I don't plan to come back again. Huaishir avoided her gaze. Sorry, I just feel that I'm afraid there's no room for further development in the industry. It should be said that he never thought of himself as a genius. If it weren't for those strange dreams that kept appearing, how could he have achieved today's level? He knew his own ability. Moreover, he could no longer be satisfied with this peaceful life. There is always an inexplicable impulse and unwillingness in his heart that made him want to leave the life that was now on the right track. There must be something in this world that he could do. It was something that was more meaningful and could satisfy him more. Just like 8 years ago, he inexplicably gave up the originally brilliant cello road. Huaishir was ready to say goodbye to his current life. It was like a psychopath. There was no difference between the two. Even he knew how irresponsible his decision was. I'm sorry. He lowered his head and apologized to Fu Yi. I'm sorry. In a long silence, Fu Yi was silent. After a long time, she suddenly said, Raise your head. Don't be so humble. Huaishir, it's too embarrassing. Huaishir raised his head. He saw a slap coming at his face. The sound was loud. Then another one. Scumbag. Fu Yi scolded angrily, which attracted the curious eyes of passers-by. After a long time, her anger gradually dissipated. In this case, will the burden of your conscience be less? Huaishir shook his head with a wry smile. Brother, aren't your hobbies too strange? Fu Yi sighed and sat beside him. Could it be that you owe me something? You've never promised me anything, right? It's as if I've never asked you. I made so much money. Do you think I'm still greedy for your share? Sorry, I just what? Fu Yi asked. Huaishir was speechless. They hadn't confirmed any relationship from the beginning. Until now, they hadn't even held hands. What could it mean? Or was it that he owed her something? You don't owe me. Huaishir. Fu Yi patted him on the shoulder. You should go home. Didn't Xiaoqin come back from Vienna these 2 days? The family should get together more often. Then you can set off again. What about you? Huaishir asked. Why are you asking so many questions? Fu Yi turned around and rolled her eyes at him skillfully. Why do you care? Huaishir was speechless. After a long silence, the two said goodbye to each other. Watching Huaishir turn around and leave, Fu Yi sat silently on a bench by the roadside and smoked. After a long time, she couldn't help but cry softly. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.